that LAFCO video it is. There's something you know it's going to happen there. Yeah. You can yeah. There they are.
Good afternoon. I'll call to order the March 2nd, 2023 meeting of the Santa Barbara Local Agency Formation Commission. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Allen,
Here.
Commissioner Freeman,
Here.
Commissioner Geyer,
Here.
Commissioner Hartman,
Here.
Commissioner Nelson, Commissioner Osborne, Commissioner Patino,
Here.
Commissioner Richardson, Commissioner Stark,
Here.
Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Kiriako.
Here.
Let the record reflect that Commissioner Osborne and Commissioner Williams are absent.
Thank you. Please stand and join me for the pledge. Ready? Begin. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So our first item of business is approval of the minutes of the February 2nd, 2023 meeting. May I have a motion?
I'll move as presented.
Second.
And any discussion? Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams, Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
So administering the oath of office is our next item of business to our newly appointed commissioners, Janelle Osborne and James Kiriako. Is Ms. Osborne joined us?
Chair Hartman, Commissioner Osborne did inform staff that she is out of state in Washington, D.C., and so we will administer her oath of office at our next meeting.
Okay, and before we do this, are there any members of the public who'd like to address this issue?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
We do?
No.
No, okay. Madam Clerk, will you please administer the oath? And congratulations, we're delighted to have you join our board. And what's interesting about LAFCO is that the alternates play a very important role in discussion and stepping in, so we're glad to have you. Now we're turning to public comment on matters not on today's agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have any members of the public who've expressed a desire to speak?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak under general public comment.
All right, moving on then to the consent calendar. I think we just have one item, correct? Okay, and did any commissioners have an interest in pulling that item? Madam Clerk, is there anybody remotely who has raised their hand?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak from the public.
All right, none from the public and none from the other commissioners. All right, so then may I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Well, I'll move to approve the consent calendar. I have a question, Madam Chair. Yeah, am I correct that Commissioner Kiriakou is voting for this purpose?
Yes, because Commissioner
Yes.
Osborne isn't here, and also Commissioner Nelson, because we don't have, thank you for drawing that to our attention. Madam Clerk. All right, so we have a motion and
I'll
a
second.
second. All right, Madam Clerk, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriakou,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
And so do we expect Commissioner Williams to come today?
Chair Hartman, I was informed that Supervisor Williams would be here in Santa Barbara today.
Okay, so we'll wait. If he doesn't show up, then I guess Commissioner Nelson would come up here. So we're on to changes of organization. Would you read the first item into the record, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Chair Hartman and members of the commission, changes of organization. Item number 1 is to consider approval of LAFCO application file number 22-09 for annexation of the property located in the incorporated area of the county at 3266 Beach Club Road, Carpinteria, California, to the Carpinteria Sanitary District.
All right, and Mr. Prater, would you make your presentation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So today we are blessed. We are using Natasha in a dual role today. So she will be giving us our presentation
All
for
right.
the 2 changes of organization, as well as acting as our clerk. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you, Mr. Prater. Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have before you today an annexation and sphere of influence amendment for 3266 Beach Club Road to the Carpinteria Sanitary District. This was an application that was submitted by the district through a resolution of application. It includes 1 parcel located at 3266 Beach Club Road with a total of 0.43 acres. The purpose of this annexation is to annex into the Carpinteria Sanitary District to provide a sewer connection for the existing house. The property is outside of the district's sphere of influence, which was last updated in 2017. The action today will also amend the sphere of influence while at the same time annexing the property. As you can see on the map, the general vicinity of the area is in the northwest location of Beach Club Road. Wow. Here. The next map provides further details showing the property is contiguous to the existing district boundary to the west. The connection would be along the north roadway that has an existing sewer main. The land use is residential with 1 developed lot containing 1 single-family residence. With this annexation, there is no change in land use that would be facilitated by the boundary change, and it continues to be within the county under residential zoning 8R1. The district submitted a plan for service that outlined the adequacy of their services to be able to provide service to the parcel, which can be found in attachment F. And the existing sewer line is located at Padaro Lane, just north of the property at approximately 200 lineal feet. In this case, the district adopted a categorical exemption under Class 19, Section 15319, and staff has also added an additional Class 3 under Section 15303. The parcel is uninhabited, which means that there are less than 12 voters. The district has consented in waiving conducting authority proceedings as well as the property owner. Therefore, we can proceed with the approval without any notice and a hearing. To conclude, the site is located in an area that allows the district to be the best service provider as they are providing service to some of the adjacent properties in the area. And the annexation represents a reasonable and logical extension of the beach club area. And with that, staff recommends the approval of the project by resolution with the following notations outlined on this slide.
So with that, if there are any questions of the commission of staff, we are available to answer any.
Commissioner Stark?
Yeah, does it appear that this parcel is sandwiched between the Carpinteria Sanitary District on both sides of it? And this would simply close the gap? Is it as simple as that?
Natasha, if you're able to go back to the close-up view, essentially that is. It is kind of surrounded, go back there to the close-up would be better. You can see this parcel here is surrounded, the area in red pink there is the sanitation district service boundary. All of the Beach Club Road area is currently outside of the district's sphere of influence. And so as each of these applicants have requested connections to the district, we have been processing a sphere amendment and annexation concurrently. What you'll see is we get to business item 2 under the water wastewater sphere update proposal. We propose to include the entirety of this territory of Beach Club Road into the district's sphere of influence moving forward. And so that will set the stage for individual annexations at that time. Basically closing in the rest of this, this island of non-serviced area.
Thank you.
Commissioner Williams?
My guess is the answer to my question is not any time in the last 50 years, but this has not been farmed at any time and therefore has no criteria that violates our policies, correct?
It's, that I don't know the answer to of the last 50 years. It currently is not being farmed and in recent history has not been farmed and has always had this resident on it, this single-family residence. And so it does adhere to our policies pertaining to preservation of ag and open space.
So I don't see any more lights. Are any commissioners who are participating from elsewhere, holler if you have a comment or question?
None up here.
Thank you, Commissioner Patino. So this is where it gets tricky. Staff and clerk, is there any public comment on this matter?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we had no request to speak on this item.
Okay, I think we're ready then for a motion.
I have one last question.
Oh, of course,
for
Commissioner
staff.
Guyer.
Yeah. Have all the fees been paid?
All fees have been paid. Thank you.
Commissioner Guyer, would you make the motion? Commissioner Williams?
I will second.
And Madam Clerk, calling the roll.
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriakou,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, and then Madam Clerk, changes of organization, item number 2.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, changes of organization item number 2 is to consider approval of LAFCO file application number 22-06, annexation of the property located in the unincorporated area of the county at 399 Arboleda Drive, Goleta, to the Goleta Sanitary District.
All right, and you're going to be presenting this item as well.
That is correct.
All right.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have before you today an annexation for 399 South Arboleda Road to the Goleta Sanitary District. This was an application that was submitted by the landowner by petition. It includes one parcel located at 399 South Arboleda Road with a total of 1.6 acres. The purpose of this annexation is to annex into the Goleta Sanitary District in order to provide sanitary sewer services to an existing single-family and small guest cottage on the property. The property is within the district's sphere of influence, which was last updated in 2016. As you can see on the map, the general vicinity of the area is in the northeast location of Arboleda Road. This next map provides further detail, showing that the property is contiguous to the existing district boundary. And the connection would be to the west, where there is an existing sewer main. The land use is residential, with one developed lot containing one single-family residence and a smaller guest cottage located south of the main home. With this annexation, there is no change in land use that would be facilitated by the boundary change, and it continues to be within the county under Residential 1.8, zoned 20R1. The district submitted a plan for service that outlined the adequacy of their services to be able to provide service to the parcel, which can be found in Attachment E. The existing sewer line is located one parcel away to the west at 398 Arboleda Road. The neighbor of that existing property is agreeable to the proposal, and a private easement will be produced. In this case, the proposal is categorical exemption under Class 1, Section 15301, and staff has added an additional Class 3, Section 15303, and Class 19, Section 15319. The parcel is uninhabited, which means that there are less than 12 voters. The district has consented in waiving conducting authority proceedings, as well as the property owner. Therefore, we can proceed with the approval without any notice and a hearing. To conclude, the site is located in an area that allows the district to be the best service provider, as they are providing service to some of the adjacent properties in the area, and the annexation represents a reasonable and logical extension of Arboleda Road. And with that, staff recommends the approval of the project by resolution with the following notations outlined on this slide, and we are ready to answer any questions you may have.
Do any commissioners have questions, comments? And again, anybody participating remotely, if you want to speak up, let yourself be heard. So I don't, yeah, Commissioner Geyer.
I again would ask, are all the fees paid?
Commissioner Geyer, yes, all fees are paid on this application.
All right, that doesn't seem to be controversial. May I have a motion? Oh, do we have any public comment?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no requests to speak on this item.
All right, now a motion.
I'll move for approval.
And a second?
I'll second.
And Commissioner Carriaco. And Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kyriaco,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Moving on to business item number 1, Madam Clerk. Do you
Sure.
Will you participate there, or will you come back here?
I'll go over there in just a minute.
All right.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, business item number 1 is to consider a 2-year agreement for professional legal services with William Dillon for an amount not to exceed $150,000.
And that's for a 2-year period?
It's a two-year period. Madam Chair, LAFCO Executive Officer Mike Prater will present this item. We will allow Mr. Dillon to step aside and sit on the audience side as we deal with his contract. Mr. Dillon has served this LAFCO since, I believe, 2011, back when he was acting as Deputy County Counsel. He came over and helped fulfill the role of legal counsel for LAFCO. And upon his retirement in 2018, LAFCO was fortunate enough to convince him to enter into a contract on a private nature to continue to serve as our legal counsel. And so this particular service agreement, I believe, will be the third sort of extension of that. We've been providing these on a 2-year rolling basis. And so this particular extension will serve out till 2025. The contract amount has not changed from the previous contract that was awarded. And that is correct, that it's not to exceed $150,000 for the 2-year period. So with that, if there are any questions of the contract, I'll be happy to answer any.
Commissioners? Commissioner Guyer?
Well, I'd just like to say that I think we're really getting a bargain at that rate. But I really appreciate the services that Bill has provided the commission over the years for a long time. Highly professional, always accessible, and I highly support approval of this contract.
Yes, Commissioner Freeman.
I'm also incredibly supportive of this, which I want to say, and I want to say very strongly before I have a procedural question, which is that in the future, let's say that we were to all have been unhappy with this contract. Tomorrow, we would no longer have a lawyer. And so is there any way that we can look at these a little bit in advance? Not that I want to say no. I'm very happy with this contract, but it just seems a little weird that it's like, let's say that I were unhappy. Tomorrow, we don't have a lawyer anymore.
Good question. Thank you, Commissioner Freeman, through the chair. So with this contract, we did alter the language slightly in the contract that does allow Mr. Dillon to continue to serve the commission beyond the end of the term of the contract. The last contract ends tomorrow, and he's no longer under contract. So today we get his services. And if we did not extend it, we would not have any legal counsel representation. But the rewrite that we did with this contract allows us to extend that service until we find or replace a contract.
Which is great. But I guess the thing that I'm trying to understand is that let's say that today we had decided no, and then maybe we would have wanted to find alternative legal counsel. And so if we have a situation like this in the future, we might need to have a little bit advanced. Like if there's another contract that's like this, like I'm not saying like this contract, you fixed it for the next time we have to deal with this contract, but today it just felt a little bit weird. So
Yeah,
just wanted to
and
comment on
that
yeah.
largely had to deal with the way we had scheduled our agendas, particularly for February, in trying to isolate that particular item so that the commission had full breadth to be able to take up that matter. Otherwise, this contract would have been on February, but I didn't want to muddy that February agenda.
Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on this item?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, I have no request to speak on this item.
All right, well, I think there's unanimity that we're very happy with the services rendered by Mr. Dillon, and we're grateful to have his long history. With an agency as complex as LAFCO, that history really, that institutional knowledge really helps. So may I have a motion?
I'll move for approval.
I'll second.
Okay, Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriakou,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
And now, Madam Clerk, would you read business item number 2 into the record?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, business item number 2 is to receive an oral staff report and set a public hearing for April 6, 2023 to consider the municipal service and sphere review for water, wastewater, recycled water, and stormwater service providers.
And just Commissioner Stark, did you have a question or your light is on for, I just wanted to check and make sure?
No, that was like a semi-close.
A remnant from.
Anticipation of this item.
And Mr. Prater, may I ask, how long do you think the presentation will be?
This presentation is rather short,
Oh, okay. Unlike the document.
unlike the document.
I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of work.
Yes, the long-awaited release of service review for water wastewater services. So we are glad, proud of the work that was performed for this. There was a lot of work involved, obviously. Just by weight and volume kind of tells you that to some extent. But the things that I wanted to highlight really stress upon, we could not write these reports without the commitment of these agencies and their staffs, right? So we reach out, we do a questionnaire, we dialogue back and forth through an admin draft. We hone in on all of the issues that they want us to cover, and we ultimately write this report. And so a lot of work goes into that, not only on your staff's part, but from the agency staff's point of view as well. And so we always like to appreciate the time they can give us to make sure that the document is as accurate as we can possibly make it be. Now, granted, we write these almost a year in advance. Most of this documentation is largely about the year 2021. A lot of that information. We are now in year 2023. And so some information has changed, but we look at it as this is a snapshot in time to cover a certain segment of services. And that's what this is intended to do. And that helps guide ultimately the commission as to where to draw the service boundary. So as we prepared this report, the one thing I can tell you is we learned a lot. We learned a lot about the different agencies, about what they actually perform, the services they carry out, about the nuances of their communities themselves, about their service infrastructure and capabilities, about their finances. We learned a lot of information. It really has helped staff kind of get a broader sense of how spheres can be amended and adjusted to tailor to the needs of these individual districts. The other thing we learned is there are a terrible amount of out-of-agency service agreements that we discovered that had been going on rightfully and accurately for the most part to be able to provide the appropriate service of water or wastewater for a particular lot, a particular neighborhood. Oftentimes what we discovered was a development was approved, a track was placed in, and then the two communities got together and said, well, your infrastructure is a lot closer than ours. Why don't you just hook up, right? So they hooked up and they did an agreement, and so all of a sudden now you've got the neighboring agency providing wastewater or water service, and there's different arrangements that have came out. So this document is really to document and highlight that they exist. We acknowledge those. We're not suggesting that they be changed or modified in any real sense of the way. But it allowed the two agencies to come together and talk about and remember what may have occurred long before the existing staffs of those agencies were part of the picture. And to decide, is this the right continued approach? Do we want to change that approach? And allowed a conversation to begin amongst those agencies. At the end of the day, the conclusions are outlined and the key findings are outlined in the staff report. And the recommendation is really to amend essentially 8 agencies' spheres of influence. Of the 33 that were studied, 8 of those boundaries are recommended to be added and in some cases subtracted in some of the agencies. Largely covering the sanitation and water districts that are documented in here. As our program is set out, all of the cities will continue to be a rolling study of the cities until we complete all 5, and at which point we will then assess where the spheres of influence for the cities need to be. And that's how we'll take that approach. But along the way, we're documenting specifically about police and fire services, now water sewer services. The next one's going to be about transportation-related services. And so we'll document these as we move through and ultimately make a decision for the commission to adopt a boundary for them. Throughout, although we are amending 8, there are 2 communities that have a recommendation to be amended, although we're not going to get to those specific boundaries yet, and that is the San Ynez CSD and the city of Santa Barbara. So they're documented in here that 2 of the study areas have been identified in need of amendment for their sphere. When we complete the full analysis of all services that those 2 communities provide, we will then adjust those boundaries as appropriate. And so it'll lean back on this service review to provide some of that justification for those future boundary changes. Outside of the over 1,000-page document that you've been asked to read and summarize for us, out of that came roughly 5, a handful of other interesting kind of policy-driven documents. So that's the other thing that the service review kind of leans to, is it gives a sense of the commission of what's going on, what are the operations, and what kind of policy decisions does the commission might need to contemplate in the future to address any of the things that may have come out of disclosure of this analysis. And so the 5 I want to talk about, the first one is the Hope Ranch community. So this got picked up as a service review boundary, as a study area for the Goleta Sanitation District. Excuse me. Largely, the area is already within the city of Santa Barbara's sphere of influence. The Goleta Sanitation District requested that we look at this site as a potential area to amend their boundary so that they can start providing sanitation services. A number of landowners within that have sought and achieved annexation. There are a handful of others that have reached out to the district for will serve letters. Excuse me. And so that was the impetus as to why they wanted this study to be done. Ultimately, staff concluded that more information needed to be involved, that the district should work with the city of Santa Barbara, come together, provide a future study analysis about what is the appropriate ways in which connections could occur, both either for the city of Santa Barbara or for the Goleta Sanitation District. We really wanted to look and have better analysis about if a gravity flow system is the best system, how does that divide amongst the landscape of the ground that's out there? And so ultimately, the recommendation was to not amend the sphere for the Hope Ranch area for Goleta Sanitation, but to defer that to another study. That study can be taken up in the next preceding year or 2. We can amend this service review and it's an annexed to that document that might highlight and make a different adjustments at that point in time. If it takes longer to review and do the analysis, we are back within 5 years doing another service review for the Goleta Sanitation District, and we may just pick it up under that review and make decisions about the sphere boundary then. The second area happens.
Why don't we pause for questions on these key issues? So Commissioner Stark.
I have I think it's a preliminary question. What is the nature of the action that is requested of us? Is this a discussion draft, or are we called upon to finally approve this set of municipal service reviews?
This is a discussion draft. The action that you're being asked to take is to set a hearing for April.
Thank you. We have the discretion to set it for May if we wanted.
You do have that discretion.
Thank you. But it's basically a set hearing item, is it?
Yeah, the minimum of a 21-day notice is required.
Thank you.
Commissioner Guyer?
I have 2 questions. I've assumed that the MSRs that's been included in our packet are the final drafts. Is that correct?
This is the final draft for the public review at this stage. So there's a 30-day public review period that will be opened as a result of this hearing. There will be comments likely received within that. We did receive an email from a district that has requested more changes to their chapter, and we will document those, track those changes, and present those changes when we bring the item back for a full adoption of the commission.
Okay. My second question is, have the affected agencies been notified of these final drafts?
They have been notified.
Okay. Thank you.
And then I had a question about Hope Ranch. In a situation like that, you've made recommendations in this report. It'll come back in 5 years. Does LAFCO have any role in overseeing the study or encouraging beyond what you've already done, the entities to come together?
LAFCO will play a role in helping the district identify the needs of information that LAFCO will want to see for the commissioners before they consider any boundary changes.
And then I just had a general question about the categories of information. Are those standard and required for MSRs, including website transparency and
A lot of that has been standardized over the years. There's not a specific requirement. When we initiate each one of these service reviews, staff presents an outline, a documentation of what that service review would entail, and a kind of a summary of what's going to happen. And the commission adopts that and gives staff direction as to what that is. And so this outline largely models that of the public safety chapter MSR version. It largely will reflect what we're going to do in the transportation one as well, just so that we have some continuity and consistency about the analysis.
Well, I really like the outline, and I especially like the learning about renewable water in some of the districts. I don't see any other lights, so I guess you may continue.
We'll continue on with number 2 policy potential for the commission to consider, and that has to deal with greenhouses properties, largely within Carpinteria Valley. That became a study area. So that became study area number 2 for them. They have been approached over the years about service opportunities for these developed properties that have greenhouses. It's been outside of the district's boundaries. The district was interested in having the policy discussion, so this became a platform for the district to have that conversation with the commission about the appropriateness of providing urban level services in agricultural properties. Because largely, as you know, we have policies that discourage that kind of level of service. And so this is the opportunity to open up that conversation, allow the district to come before the commission either today or in April to have a broader discussion about what we think should happen. And ultimately, this can lead to another conversation down the road as we start to see the needs for sanitary service, the need for recycled water opportunities for these communities. That's all documented in this document, and that's why that's kind of placed out here. Again, the recommendation at this point was to not include these properties into their spheres for various reasons. If there's any questions about the greenhouse.
Am I remembering correctly that having the greenhouse water would be a benefit to the wastewater treatment system?
The districts have identified that they could see benefit for that type of service. So that would add, if they wanted to get into the recycled water component, then that would enhance their flow.
And they're pretty far down the road on exploring recycled water in Carpinteria, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, any other, Commissioner Guyer?
On a study like Hope Ranch, I assume that would take some time. There'd be some costs involved with that. Is that budgeted into LAFCO's budget? Or is that something that we would budget in for the coming fiscal year? Or would Galita Sand pay for that, or Hope Ranch Association?
Yeah, largely it's not within LAFCO's budget. It would come from the district's ability to do that type of study and hire any professionals to flush out any of the details. LAFCO's, through our budget, would utilize staff's time to sit and iron out what the needs are, but we would not take up that study. It wouldn't be LAFCO's study, it would be the district's study.
Commissioner Stark?
I have a question. I'm not sure whether it relates to this item or the next item, but it has to do with the level of detail about pension obligations that are in your report. I noticed that the report indicates those agencies that have retirement systems and those agencies that don't, but it might be more helpful if there was some indication of there's probably a standard metric. It's probably percentage of unfunded liability that is standardly used among public agencies as to when that becomes a concern. And if that could be integrated somewhere in the MSR process for the various agencies, I think it might be helpful.
Yeah, and that is somewhat integrated into this. As you'll see in that chapter, you'll see a table looking back at the last 4-year trend of what percentage of the proportionality are they covering. And it looks at their pension obligations beyond retirement as to how much they pay into that. Some districts set up a trust account that they pay in advance. Others do pay on a pay-as-you-go basis. And that's what's all documented within that financial chapter section.
If I might, without sending off any unnecessary alarm bells, did you happen to flag any of the districts that were in serious trouble with respect to their pension obligations?
We did not flag any.
So I guess we're ready for issue number 3.
Issue number 3. Issue number 3 deals with Montecito and the consolidation efforts that they are undertaking. So this is documented in the service review largely for Montecito Water District, but certainly Montecito Sanitary District is teamed up with the 2 districts to study the concept of a consolidation effort. There were 12 study areas within Montecito Water District, one of the largest requests that we had. Many of the conclusions are, I should step back. The main reason for the request is the district wanted to align their service boundary with what was actually happening on the ground and what water they were providing those individual landowners and customers, which makes a lot of sense. However, in the analysis, because this consolidation effort is underway and it does involve a sanitation district, and the outcome potentially could be a form of a new district like a CSD, we were hesitant to amend the boundary of the districts at this point in letting that process play out a little bit, letting the districts decide if moving forward with the consolidation was in their best interest and feasible before they'd likely submit an application to LAFCO. We didn't want to reshape all of these boundaries, have that consolidation effort, decide to move forward, and then have to reposition all those boundaries on the heels of that kind of action. So, excuse me. So a lot of the recommendations are in support of these changes that align with their service needs, contingent upon how it plays out with the consolidation effort. Any questions on the Montecito from anybody?
Nothing up here.
Issue number 4 has to do with
I spoke too soon.
Maybe just, what was the district reaction to, essentially you're saying they're thinking the first step is to change boundaries and then to entertain consolidation, and you're saying, no, the first thing is to figure out whether you want to consolidate and then change boundaries. Is that what was the
Yeah, we had some conversations with the district and their staffs. They largely, because they weren't quite sure and didn't have direction from their respective boards, they had some reservations about why that effort of consolidation played such a big part in this service review. But as I explained, it's largely because of the way we foresee how they're going to proceed, just as you explained. So we want them to make a decision about what they want to do before LAFCO acts. Number 4 has to do with Summerlin Sanitation District. So through this process, Summerlin Sanitation has identified a number of potential challenges that they may be facing in the future. And at one point requested the staff talk about what a dissolution process might look like, not committing one way or the other to that process, but just wanting to understand what that process entails. And so what didn't get picked up was a study area of who would be best suited to serve Summerlin sanitation boundaries if they were to dissolve into another district. Although there is some notations in various chapters that Carpinteria Sanitation District is a neighboring district and likely could be a suitor for that. But largely, those two districts need to have that conversation amongst themselves about whether that's something viable for either district. And so that's how we concluded that. But having that conversation in the service review does set up an early conversation piece, and particularly for the commissioners to understand the dynamics that's happening out there. And so if in the future, whether it be 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years down the road, this conversation is not new to anybody, right? So we've sort of laid the initial groundwork of, hey, there might be some concerns here. There might be some suitors. Let's start to feel out what that looks like and how we can respond in a productive way. And that was the conclusion. So the Summerlin Sanitation District does provide service to out-of-agency properties through an agreement. And so those boundaries have been requested and recommended to be added to the district. So their sphere boundaries is expected to expand. We expect them to annex that property so that it's in right under the district's service boundary territory. Any questions about Summerlin? Okay, lastly, one more question. We do.
One thing I'm trying to understand from the discussion you just provided is how serious the discussion was. It almost sounded like in the description you just provided that it was just almost a whimsical thought from the staff about like, we should learn how dissolution works. And now it's kind of snowballed into this. When it was in our month or two ago, it was 2 months ago because we were here in like the potential future agenda items is like dissolving Summerlin Cemetery, and now and I'm wondering, like, was it a really serious discussion, or was it this more of this like?
I think it had a little bit more merit than just a whimsical thought.
Okay.
I mean, I think the district will be faced with some serious decisions about cost, about infrastructure improvements that they will have to wrangle with. And that outcome of that decision is on the district to have with their constituents. And largely, it could lead to a significant increase in cost for them. And so they'd have to contemplate, does that cost serve to complete the needs for the community, or is some other route, such as a dissolution or annexation into another district, a better path for them?
Okay. In giant air quotes, great. I mean, it's just, I don't like to hear that people are the struggling is happening, but I also was I was concerned by the idea that districts might be in a position of feeling, well, do I really want to ask about, like what my options are? Is it going to end up in my MSR? And then like, another 10 years from now, people are going to be like, well, you were talking about dissolving yourself 10 years ago. Why don't we just dissolve you? This is zero sphere you. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Commissioner Williams.
that looks like it may have triggered another.
Yeah, I mean, I think that between the 3 sanitary districts east of Santa Barbara, Carpinteria, Montecito, and Summerlin, there's been a lot of discussion about, number one, building new infrastructure, recycled water, and the ability to maintain the old. And I think it all creates a sort of synergy where you have a lot more people thinking about, does it really make sense for there to be this many districts, and can the missions be accomplished in some other ways? So I think there's just a lot of discussion in the ether about this. you know, and obviously some of that discussion, at least between Montecito and Santa Barbara, has even stretched farther west.
Good summation of that. And oftentimes these service reviews can be that catalyst for that conversation to occur, right? So they may be on their back burner to get to at some point. LAFCO comes to the table and says, hey, we're going to prepare a service review that deals with this topic. It flushes out the need to then have that conversation. So the last one is this notion of out-of-agency service agreements that I mentioned that we unearthed a number of for various districts, both cities, sanitation, water, all of them have these in place. A handful or many of them were approved by the commission over the years. And so they're well documented in that process and met the need for that and for that purpose. So in addition to that, the city of Santa Barbara, in their response to our service review, looked at an out-of-agency service structure as an opportunity to more streamline a service approach rather than going through the full annexation process, and wanted to know if that was a possibility of a policy direction from the commission. So that conversation is in the Santa Barbara chapter about that. It highlights the policies that are in play that the commission has adopted. This also ties into a later information on the LAFCO white paper that we're going to talk about later about out-of-agency service agreements in general. Excuse me. And so this might be an opportunity for the commission to have this broader conversations about how we treat out-of-agency service agreements and whether or not, how far do we go in potentially conditioning those to seek annexation at some future date, as the CKH Act basically tells us that out-of-agency service agreements are a plausible approach as an interim fix to an anticipation of annexation. And so I think what we found is we have these service agreements that are 20 years old that never intend to probably annex into the territory. So is that a policy decision that this commission wants to take up or not? And so that's essentially the 5 areas that came out of this study that we felt might lead to a more major policy discussion for the commission. You don't have to take up any of those. It's not required. But it's just good information to kind of put on the table at this point. Ultimately, the recommendation is to set this for a public hearing for April 6th. So that concludes staff's presentation.
Commissioner Williams?
Well, I just want to say for my part as a commissioner and as a human being, I really support any actions that we can take that can facilitate these small districts adapting to the infrastructure needs of the future, especially in recycled water. But you know, I appreciate your being a resource to them, and want to maybe increase that level of cooperation if some of these districts are ready to make a move soon. It's been talked about for a long time, and we shouldn't rush them, but we should say, hey, you know, we're ready to do something more if you're ready to move.
Commissioner Stark?
Yeah, I think I have 2 process questions. The first is the item related to the consideration of a policy relating to out of agency service agreements. Was that intended to be tied to the city of Santa Barbara's concerns, or are you referring to that as a standalone policy issue for the commission? And my second issue relates to that, which is, at what point is it appropriate for the commission to indicate which of the various items that you mentioned warrant further action? Would that be when we bring it back or some separate other time?
Thank you, Commissioner Stark, through the chair. So in response, it really is intended to be a more global approach, although the city of Santa Barbara raised it as a mechanism in which they thought would best suit their needs. I think having that conversation for all agencies that provide out-of-agency service agreements would be a uniform approach. And so these policies, as I speak of them, really come at the pleasure of the commission individually to seek future agenda items to bring forward. So through this approach, we're not suggesting any policy changes. We're just suggesting you adopt the service review, you amend spheres as appropriate, and that's the action for the item. But as an outcome of that, we noted at least 5 areas. There may be more that the commissioners might pick up on, or even other members of the public, that at some future date on our calendar when we have future agenda items, if you wanted to take one of those up, we would start to broach that topic and start to have some staff time towards what that might entail.
Thank you.
And if I might follow on, so we have had CSDs come in. I think of Isla Vista, I think of Los Olivos, to talk about things. In terms of Hope Ranch, the carp greenhouses, Montecito consolidation, and the potential Summerlin dissolution, would it ever be appropriate to invite them to be part of a discussion, and that would be a bit of a prompt?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good use of understanding where each of those communities sit at with these issues from their perspective, right?
So you're making recommendations in the review, but you're asking us if we want to follow up, and I think that's one question we need to address as a commission. The issue of the out-of-agency service agreements, I think I'm very interested in that coming back with more substance around it. It seems to me that there are some places where we would anticipate a sphere expansion. There are some places maybe it's not appropriate, and I'm wondering, can we have a policy like that has criteria for when we don't expect, or is this something assumed in state law and we're kind of stuck with it, or we look the other way when it expands beyond 20 years?
I'll leave it for the rest of the commissioners to.
Well, I'll also add a comment. I do think we should be supportive of out-of-area service agreements because essentially if you're forced into the lane of sphere of influence and annexation or into a sanitary district in particular, that has historically been sort of like the first step towards loss of ag land in terms of a development of ag land. The reason why this is an issue in Carpinteria is not to develop ag land. It's because the desire to comply fully with Regional Water Quality Control Board orders that have gotten more and more stringent over time about the discharge of water. And so the options for those for keeping agriculture in operation becomes more limited, where they either need to truck discharge water somewhere, which is a terrible option for the environment, terrible option for the economics, terrible option for our roads, or figure out some other solution. And we don't want to make them have to go forward with an annexation, because many in the community would view that as a first step towards loss of the ag land. This is actually about trying to preserve the ag land, not about losing it. The out-of-area service agreement provides a middle path. And one I would add was suggested, by county staff to avoid the problem of of the question of annexation or not annexation.
Commissioner Guyer.
Yeah, I would support a future talk about this because it, for me, I guess what I would want to see is how much latitude do we have from the description of out-of-area service agreements in the Act and what is trying to be accomplished.
Staff hears that from the commission, and we will pick up that dialogue a little bit when we talk about the informational item under the LAFCO white paper. But I will conclude that's the sort of the beauty and the art of the way Cortese-Nacht-Hirschberg was written. It allows for local circumstances and local conditions. We have policies that are in place. We've exercised those policies and sought opportunities to expand service boundaries through out-of-agency service extensions. And those territories haven't necessarily been annexed. And that's okay. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as has been expressed. It's sort of a fix that does work and get services that are needed so that we can avoid really public health safety issues coming down, that we foresee coming down the road. And staff isn't suggesting we need a fix to anything per se. We're just simply highlighting that this policy issue came up. The commission should weigh and decide where you want to sit with this. And you may just say the policies we have in place and the practice that we have operated under works for us. And that could, but we can bring, certainly bring more information in and about that in future items the commission wants.
So I think there is a consensus that we'd like to see that, and as you're intimating, it's not just the case in Carpinteria, but there are other examples. Another issue you mentioned, that some of these agreements are old, and that the current operators of the facilities may not know a lot about them. I gather now with the MSR that they will, some of that is cataloged, so it's available, but I, in your future report, would be interested in knowing if that's an issue where we need to weigh in more heavily. So I think that deals with issue number 5. We'd like it to come back. Yes, Commissioner Freeman.
Thank you. Sorry, today has not been a very good day. I would have had a question actually about out-of-area service agreements. So the in the case of an out-of-area service agreement, I presume that because the territory is not annexed into the district, they don't have representation in the sense that they can't run for office or they don't vote for the area. And so I guess I have some concerns with the kind of what I'm hearing is like the sprawling out-of-area service agreements. I definitely hear what Commissioner Williams is saying here on the concerns people have about, well, you provide services to this piece of ag land because we want to protect it to get the sewer system there, but now you mean maybe they're going to develop it. But I'm kind of under the impression that LAFCO, you know, our commission is under it has the latitude to, as annexations occur, to essentially provide a like a proviso on it that you can have this territory, but you are only allowed to zone it in certain ways, or you're only allowed to provide certain kinds of services. Is that the case, or am I wrong?
Staff would correct you in that. That is not the case.
When this came up, when we were talking about the annexation to the Bailey, that's not the right one. The one from last month when we were doing the
Bailey Avenue?
It was Bailey Avenue. Okay, I was under there was a lot of discussion that had come up about the latitude that we had. What was that latitude about? I thought that was something where it's like, oh, you know, the commission should feel okay making these, you know, because they can always just negotiate if you don't want
you
them to do
have
this.
broad discretion in deciding whether to adjust the sphere boundary and even to annex territory. Where I would advise you in that is that we do not have direct land use. So we cannot put a proviso that says you've zoned this residential or commercial. Therefore, it must always be that. The provision is that cities must pre-zone the site, inform LAFCO of that pre-zone for our annexation, That pre-zone only needs to exist for 2 years. Then it's in the city, and the city has full discretion under its authorities and land use powers to make the property be what they deem appropriate. I largely, if a residential tract gets built, they're probably not going to come in 2 years and say, well, let's bulldoze that down and put in a mini mart, right? They're probably not going to do that, but they could pre-zone it for a commercial site. That commercial site may never get built. As we know, commercial is always a difficult challenge to get accomplished. They can wait 2 years, and then they can say, well, we tried commercial, didn't work, we're now going to rezone it to residential. And it does not come back to LAFCO.
Thank you so much for the clarification. I'm sorry for asking these.
No, it's
potentially, like,
really important one to
incorrect
understand
questions, so.
clearly. Commissioner Guyer.
Yeah, I think that the out-of-area service agreement, when we do have a future meeting and discussion about it, I see kind of a threefold problem with it in a sense. That would be out-of-area service agreements prior to LAFCO, out-of-area service agreements during LAFCO, and it looks like what we have is what is in the future. And it leads me back to the discussion we had on the Lompoc issue. Has certain aspects of the act itself become obsolete and need to be changed? I don't think that we're the body to change it, but we could influence some changes. So I would appreciate kind of a threefold approach to it.
Yeah, and I just would like to, a quick survey of the different types of out-of-area service agreements. I'm thinking of one where we would like city services to county land, and we don't want to be annexed into the county, I mean, into the city. So it would be enduring. So I think there's a universe out there that might fall into different categories. So clearly, we want that to come back. So that brings us to the other four issues. I guess, let me ask the commission, is there a sense that we would like each of those to come back at some point over the next several years and report to us? We've got a 5-year life of the MSR, and at some point, we may want to learn more. We may be able to nudge or ask some questions. Hope Ranch, Carp Greenhouses, Montecito Consolidation, and Summerland Dissolution. Commissioner Stark.
My thought is it's probably somewhat premature to make that decision at this time, particularly as our EO has pointed out that for many of these areas, the impetus has got to come from the districts themselves, and the conversations have to start with the districts themselves rather than have us try to drive them externally.
If I may, I think we can nudge. We won't drive, but I think what I've witnessed already is with Los Olivos and with Isla Vista CSDs that our questions and it has an influence, and I think it's also informative to us. So I would like to see these come back at some point, but not immediately. So, Commissioner Williams.
Well, I mean, I think the out-of-area service agreements is being asked for by
Yeah, issue number
districts.
5, yes. Now we're talking about the other 4.
And then I think the Montecito one, I think, is the question of whether they, now that you've told them the right order to go in, whether they still want to move forward, right? And I don't see why we wouldn't bring that up sooner rather than later, since it is a topic of constant community discussion.
Okay, so maybe that's a priority, that would be one of the first. Where would you put the carp greenhouses on a list in terms of timing for coming back?
That's the out of the area service agreements, because that's
No. Well, it fits within that, but it's a more.
Yeah, I think there's a nuance to that. As I hear the discussion amongst the commissioners, I think in Hope Ranch case, that was driven because Goleta Sanitation said, we'd like this area studied and we'd like our sphere to include that. And so I think as the commission has laid out, it puts the onus on the district. If you still want your sphere there, then you need to start providing some groundwork and some discussion that you can then eventually bring forward to the commission in a more informal sense about where you want to go and why. And so that I think that'll be driven largely by that thought by the district. Hearing this conversation, likely they participate or hear in our conversations at the commission level, but I can also go back and send a correspondence through an email or some chain and say, you've had this conversation, they'd like to hear more about what it is you're trying to achieve. And so if you've got some time, we'll pencil in a hearing date for you, give you an opportunity to stand at the microphone and give the commission some more information. I think that's similar with greenhouse gases, or the greenhouses within Carpinteria. It came from because of this idea that services were being requested of them. And they wanted to see, is that viable? Is that not viable? For various reasons. And so they too will be extended the opportunity to come to the podium, express what their thoughts are and the benefits and detriments to that decision-making for the commission. And so I think we can easily have those. Montecito is having that conversation already. I think when they get to a point where their boards have wrestled with it long enough and made some earnest decisions about the direction they want to go, I think that would be an opportune time then to come back and present that information to this commission so that you're more informed about what kind of direction they foresee themselves heading down. And so I think that can address that. Similar with Summerlin. I think when they get far enough along about knowing what are the implications of the decisions they have to make, we offer the platform of the commission's microphone for them to express what they want out of LAFCO as it relates to any boundary changes that come forward. And then the fifth one is certainly on LAFCO. We'll bring back some more discussions evolving around out-of-agency service agreements. And I will note in the next two hearings of our meetings in April and May, we have two of these applications coming forward for out-of-agency service agreements. So that conversation will be starting soon.
Commissioner Guyer?
So in a sense, we're still on business item 2, right? Yeah, okay,
Yes.
so we've kind of drifted off of that a little bit. So where we're at is to actually set the date for that hearing.
The date for the hearing and any direction that we want to give.
Yeah, so we could either have this discussion at that time or whenever the hearing is or later.
Well, yeah, we can continue to discuss if that would be your preference. I guess the issue, did we want to extend the hearing by a month as Commissioner Stark initially recommended, or go with what staff has put forward?
If I might, Madam Chairman, my thought was, my understanding is that the Bailey Avenue hearing is coming back for findings and at the next meeting, and if we were going to have an extended discussion on the MSR, it might not work so well. That's the only reason I suggested.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a very lengthy hearing on Bailey Avenue, and we had a conceptual vote. I don't anticipate that that will be a lengthy hearing, or it would be very repetitive.
Madam Chair, staff may, we anticipate bringing that back on consent to just simply adopt a resolution for the action of denial on that.
Commissioner Guyer?
Yeah, I would support waiting till May, just to give the affected agencies more time to go through their MSR.
Mr. Prater, how does that sound to you?
We will bring back in May.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go to public comment. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Nelson, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Start waving at
No,
me.
that's fine. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I'm not sure if it's appropriate here, but, and I was kind of going to say some of this for our future conversation about the Richards Ranch annexation, but, you know, looking over all these materials, it seems that the sphere of influence on Orchid and Santa Maria is something that I'd be looking at as an issue, and I don't know if it fits here necessarily, or if that needs to come through some other requests, maybe potentially from the county.
So Yeah, good question, Commissioner Nelson, through the chair. So the city of Santa Maria sphere is on this item as we are looking at it. It didn't get picked up as a study area for the Orcutt community. Essentially, the recommendation was to maintain the sphere for the city of Santa Maria. And the next launch of our transportation is another opportunity to talk about spheres of the city of Santa Maria, and easily could come in as that as well. As we have spoken, I think the best approach to addressing the community of Orcutt as it moves forward is a much bigger program approach than the use of this particular MSR for water and wastewater because of the discussions that we've had already to date. I think that launching into whether to retract or expand in the Orcutt community is a different piece of information that needs to be brought forward and analyzed kind of separately.
So that would be a separate workshop, if I might follow up, looking at the various services for Orcutt?
Right, and I think a broader conversation with the city of Santa Maria and the county as to how that plays out really needs to be the impetus as to, well, where does that boundaries lie for the city? Now, again, ultimately in 2025, we will be proposing a boundary for the city of Santa Maria. And we would certainly want to know that information before then if we were going to adjust the city's boundary.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hartman. What's the timeline on the transportation MSR?
That is business item 3. You're going to steal my.
All
I
right,
guess.
I guess my
Essentially by the end of the year.
okay. So my concern here is that one of the things that we're going to be talking about later is contemplating some changes that would be significant and may take us to a place of no return. And so, for me, it's looking at this thing holistically includes kind of a pause button. And so that's why, at this point, I probably would not be able to, if I get a chance to vote on this in May, I probably wouldn't be able to support keeping the status quo on the sphere of influence for the city of Santa Maria. So that's a concern moving forward and something that we should talk about. And I guess I'll try to talk to you a little bit more offline about that. And if there's an opportunity to at least have the discussion, part of the May hearing.
Okay, so I think Orchid and the various services is another issue on the agenda for the future, along with out-of-area service agreements in general for the whole county area. And we can talk about what we want to see with the other 4 issues, but at least what I heard from discussion is that the Montecito consolidation is probably earlier in a timeline. The Summerlin dissolution is probably later, and Hope Ranch and the Carp greenhouses are in the middle. Public comment, Madam Clerk.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we do have a couple of requests to speak on this item. First, I would like to remind those joining us on Zoom today that when we do get to an item on our agenda that you would like to provide comments, please use the raise hand feature, and your name will be called at the appropriate time. I do have a letter that was sent in with the request to read it into the record. It was sent in by Amber Thompson. In November 2022, Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District submitted significant changes to the municipal service and sphere review for water, wastewater, recycled water, and stormwater service providers, MSR admin draft. But it appears that most of the edits were not incorporated into the MSR public review draft, March 2nd, 2023 publication. Please make note that Chapter 3, Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District section in the March 2nd, 2023 is not accurate information as presented. SYRWCD will resubmit a revised version for inclusion in the final publication. And again, that was submitted by Amber Thompson. And we will now go to Craig Murray.
Can you
Would
hear me?
I didn't have your speaker on. Would you just introduce yourself once again so we can record it?
Happy to. My name is Craig Murray. I'm the general manager of the Carpinteria Sanitary District. Nice to see you all again. First and foremost, I'd like to commend Mr. Prater and his team for what was a very thorough, very comprehensive analysis, far different than the previous iterations of municipal service reviews that we've been involved with. I can attest to the fact that it was a collaborative and iterative process that Mr. Prater heard our input, integrated it into the document, and very well done. One of the things that I'll note is that this, I think the full term or full name of this process is Municipal Service Review and Sphere of Influence Update. And while we've requested in prior times to have our sphere updated through this process, this is the first time that it's really been happened in the form of a recommendation. So thank you for that. Already there's been some discussion about the one issue that has affected our agency a lot over the past several decades. And I think most of you know that a large part of the Carpinteria Valley is covered in greenhouses. It's industrial type of agriculture, very different from an aesthetic standpoint than open field agriculture or vineyards. Also different in the intensity of use and the number of workers and the need for urban services. So I apologize, my phone is buzzing, but over the past almost 20 years I've been the manager of this agency, we've had repeated requests from agriculturalists to provide sewer service. Oftentimes the sewer line is right in front of their property. They have needs, their septic tanks are failing. Use has intensified as some of these properties have transitioned to cannabis cultivation and processing. Some have retail service operations. And so there's been this need. We've advanced it through the municipal service review process, through individual applications, and it really hasn't ever been supported. There are instances, for instance, we have a fairly large greenhouse parcel, 3 parcels together that were annexed to our district in over 40 years ago, and they remain greenhouse active operations. And so when you get to that conversation about out of area service agreements and whether this is a valid point, we'd like to have input on that too, because we don't think that provision of sewer service is really that next step to condominiums. We think there's a future, and I think the county has a big say in what happens with land use and development. So I appreciate the fact that it was brought forward in this context as an area of study. It is an important one. And lastly, I'm going to highlight why the timing is important for Carpinterians. Next week, the Carpinteria Valley Water District is prepared to enter into a final design agreement for a recycled water project that is going to recycle all of the wastewater that comes to our facility, over 1 million gallons a day.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We're all
Yeah, we hope it
we
goes
do
forward.
this when we
We've had good support for that project in many ways, and I think it's actually going to sort of the balance is tilted towards this project going forward. The reason these greenhouses are of interest to us at this time, maybe more so than ever, is that there is some significant or substantial, at least, amount of flow that could come from these properties to our system and then be purified and become part of the water resources for Carpinteria. So we haven't necessarily quantified that, but we know a lot of the wastewater is being generated on all of these greenhouses. It's going either into Arroyo Paradon Creek or it's going into septic tank leach fields. It could be beneficially reused through this project we're working on. So I'd ask that if there is future study that we pick it up as soon as we can and see if we can make it happen while we're starting into the time when we're going to be designing the infrastructure to do that. So thank you very much.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we will now go to Zoom with Joe Bargett. Mr. Bargett?
Yes, hi. My name's Joe Bargett. I'm the general manager of Vandenberg Village Community Services District. Just had one comment, and that would be to ask the commission to consider removing the detail, or at least reducing the level of detail on rates and charges in the MSR. I look at this MSR as an important historical document that has a shelf life of 5 to 10 or more years. And the two reasons for recommending that you consider removing or reducing a level of detail are one, people don't go to an MSR to look for information on rates and charges. They typically go to an agency website or maybe even the county. The county water agency does an annual rate survey that has a lot of good information on it. And the second reason is by publishing information on rates and charges in the MSR, the information is obsolete almost as soon as it's published or shortly after it's published. Most of us change our rates every year. Our rates are very varied and complicated, and I think that the MSR is more of a global document. It doesn't need a level of detail on rates and charges. And I realize it's late in the game, but it's still a draft document. So that's my comment.
Thank you for that.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no additional requests to speak.
So, Mr. Prater, could you respond to Ms. Thompson's comments about San Ynez Conservation District?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Chair and Commission. So I did receive that email of their concern that much of their edits did not make it in the final draft. And we had sent them a Word version for them to re-edit that version. And as I noted in my reply, not all comments that were made by the districts were necessarily accepted by staff for various reasons. We may have sought alternative sources for that analysis, but we will consider all of that information. And when we bring the item back, we will present a proposed change table that documents all of the edits that they'd like to see for the commissioners to consider and make a recommendation as to why it should be in or out, and then ultimately change the document for the commission's direction.
Great. And then with regard to Carpinteria Sanitation and Mr. Murray, I think I heard him saying he'd like something sooner rather than later, or would you care to respond to that?
I would just note that I think we hear his concern that discussion from the commission about the opportunity so that they can design their system early in the process is more advantageous than not. And so I will reach back out to Mr. Murray to probably likely bring this item back forward or have him come back at our May, it sounds like maybe we'll be back in May or April agenda to have further discussion about the needs of that if it warrants. Although I think it's expressed pretty clearly in his remarks today and in the document of the benefits that they see for that. And so, you know, although the commission may accept those benefits, whether or not we want to actually change the boundary or not is what would be up for discussion.
And so would we adopt the MSR, or would we have a discussion of that issue and make it part of the change? Would we amend the MSR?
As I see it, the commission would likely have a conversation further about the issue. And at the time of adoption, if you wanted to include those properties into their sphere so that they can include them into their future service boundary, then you would make that recommendation at that point. And we would adopt their sphere boundary as modified from what was presented in this publication.
Okay. And then the level of detail on rates and charges, is that an issue that you've considered before?
Yeah, we have considered that. We've had that conversation with a number of the districts about the rates. We acknowledge that this is a snapshot in time and that rates often change. And by no means do we think this document is the end-all be-all for rates, but it is a good comparison for that snapshot that we're trying to replicate in this report.
So it's your recommendation that that you can compare one to another, and at least at a moment of time, that's a good thing.
At a moment of time of, you know, at the time, this is what the rates were when we adopted this report. We will pick rates up again in the next cycle of review. We will compare what those rates are to what this report said, and I think it provides that track of knowledge as we move forward as of services and costs.
Commissioner Guyer and then Stark.
I assume that when this comes back for adoption on these MSRs in May, that if there was a difference between an agency and staff, that at that time we could adopt the ones that don't have a problem with them, more or less on a consent basis, and then ones that have some differences or challenges, we could work on those one at a time.
Through the chair, Commissioner Guyer, the recommendation would be just address each of those concerns at the time in May. So if there's a request from an agency to change any of the text within the document, we will document all of that text. We will present all that text to the commissioners, and we will give the commissioners a recommendation as to whether accepting the new text or keeping the old text. And ultimately, the commission will tell us what you want to do. If you want to accept all new text, then we will edit that final version before we publish it and edit all the text.
Yeah, I certainly think going out to May gives an additional amount of time to
Yeah.
be able to work out any
For the
differences.
districts, yeah. Commissioner Stark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to verify, am I not correct? We have no control over rates. Rates are an indicator to us that possibly there might be some matter within our jurisdiction that we ought to look at, but we don't directly regulate district rates, do we?
Yeah, that is correct. We do not regulate any rates.
So I think we're ready for a motion. Commissioner Williams?
So what I'm thinking is the correct motion is to approve item 2 with the exception of the Carpinteria Sanitary District's questions that we would reopen as part of a larger discussion about sphere of influence,
In May.
influence boundaries.
Yeah,
in May.
sooner rather than later.
And I just want to preface and say, that doesn't mean that I have decided on whether I want larger sphere of influence. I'm just trying to weigh the advantages of enlarging the sphere of influence versus or changing our policies on out-of-area service agreements, whichever would facilitate the goal of, better water quality, lower amounts of traffic, but without necessarily having some unintended consequences.
So a lot of discussions in May. So that was the motion.
The motion to clarify is to approve item 2 with the exception of the Carpinteria Sanitary District, which we will revisit in May.
Is that clear enough, that motion?
It's clear that the motion is to set the hearing for May.
Yeah, set the hearing for May, and
And
this
still
will come
allow
up.
the
Yeah.
Carpinteria concern to be heard.
Yeah.
So we can reopen the public on that topic.
Great.
May I, yes, Commissioner Freeman?
I'm trying to clarify, I'm misunderstanding something. So we will have the hearing in May, with the exception of the full hearing in May, and then with the exception of Carpinteria, which we will discuss in May. So I'm trying to understand what the difference is between.
As part of the discussion of the MSR in May, will be a further discussion of Carpinteria?
Yes, that is my understanding of the motion, that we will have the full discussion of all the text and any changes proposed by the districts in May, with the added caveat that Carpinteria Sanitation District would be given the opportunity to further explore changing their sphere boundary, particularly in study
Potentially
area
after
2.
May. Okay.
This is a thing where
Mr.
staff
Dillon.
cleans up a motion made by a board member. Usually it's polite and seamless, but you've exposed it well.
Mr.
I was just
Dillon?
confused, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, it's a noticed item, so we should continue it to a specific date, which would be May 6th. our
May
regular
6th,
hearing.
okay,
That's
and so,
The maker of the motion is good.
and the seconder
May
accepts.
4th.
May 4th.
May 4th, okay. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any final discussion? Oh, okay, Madam Clerk.
Madam Chair, can we reiterate, the motion was by Commissioner Williams. Who seconded the?
I thought, okay, we need a second. I thought it was Stark, Commissioner Stark.
I'm happy to second the clarified, redeemed motion.
All right, we do have a motion and a second, an understanding of what it means. Now we're ready for the vote.
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriako,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
And Madam Chair, I just want to say, in punishment for that unclear motion, I am temporarily demoting myself, and my county alternate will be taking over for the rest of the meeting.
All right, and we'll have a 5-minute break. Good afternoon. We're reconvening the March 2nd, 2023 meeting of the Santa Barbara Local Agency Formation Commission. And we're going to alter the agenda a little bit and go to business item number 4. There are members who would like to address us on that. And then last will be business item number 3. So Madam Clerk, would you read business item number 4 into the record, please?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, business item number 4 is to consider and hold a study session for City of Santa Maria annexation of Richards Ranch, consisting of 4 parcels located in unincorporated area of Santa Barbara County to the northeast and southeast of the intersection of State Route 135 and Union Valley Parkway. Assessors parcel numbers 107-250-19, 107-250-20, 107-250-21, and 107-250-22. And these parcels are within the city's sphere of influence and adjacent to the southeastern limits of the city of Santa Maria, total approximately 44 acres, and are further described in the draft environmental impact report.
Mr. Prater, will you explain what our role is in all of this?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So this is a study session intended to discuss informational needs for the Richards Ranch, essentially draft EIR and future potential annexation requests. So the annexation has not occurred. The city has not taken its full consideration and action to initiate an annexation request, but they are anticipating that. And so they prepared a draft environmental document that would cover that action. In anticipation of that, LAFCO would act as a responsible agency and utilize this environmental report to take future actions on annexation. And so this is our first and early opportunity to provide comment and feedback to the city and the developer team about what information needs LAFCO wants to see before you take a formal action. And so what was provided in the packet was a brief project summary of the project, so you got a basic understanding of the project. The executive summary section of the draft EIR and the mitigations and impacts that were associated in that proposal. This was a key site within the Orcutt Community Plan, key site 26, titled Richards, hence the name Richards Ranch, as it came forward. And what's being proposed at this point from the city's standpoint is really a conceptual development proposal. So it's largely a mix of some commercial uses and high-density residential, up to approximately 500 homes on the site. With many of the annexation applications that come before the commission, LAFCO identifies a number of key issues that you want to talk about and that we have to consider, and different factors that go into the consideration of a decision. And so we at staff like to typically see these early and in a draft EIR if possible, so that all of the analysis will be vetted and gone through a public hearing process, and any decisions, future decisions that the commission may make can be rooted and documented in the environmental report itself. So with that, the typical areas of concern that LAFCO likes to talk about are these efficient provisions of urban services, right? If urban level services are required of a development, who is the best suitor to provide that service? Do they have the capability to provide that service and the capacities to provide that service? And what are the costs associated with providing those services? And through that, are adequate mitigations being adopted and addressed to offset any impacts that might be disclosed through the process? In addition, as we had with the Bailey Avenue proposal, is there are other areas in which LAFCO can weigh in on And in this case, we're looking at affordable housing as a component because it is a residential project. LAFCO can factor in, is the city in its application seeking to further advance regional housing needs, allocations, addressing affordable housing concerns? That is a state issue as well, and any other key factors that we want to consider. And before we actually take decisions on a project and its merits, we want to make sure that all of the information is gathered around as possible, so that you can be as informed as you can be before you take that decision. In this case, the city's draft EIR has evaluated the proposed project. They have identified some environmental impacts and some mitigations that are outlined in their report. Staff has looked at that. Staff has provided some additional feedback and in the form of a draft comment letter of additional information that we thought the commission would want before any real project became before the commission for decision. So that's what is being presented to you, is a letter ultimately that would be submitted to the city to address all future needs or future informational needs that the commission desires to have in advance of an application. In this discussion, the staff's comments really have to deal with what the city has, or what the developer has proposed to the city. Staff has had conversations with the developer and their team and with the city in the preparation of this. We have gone over our comments letter, kind of outlining what our concerns were. Many of those have to deal with additional factors and policies that were not fully identified in the IR that we wanted them to amend. They have agreed in concept to essentially most of the stuff that we were asking for. And so they will be addressing that. The other elements that we are talking about is this understanding of a water agreement and what that agreement entails in more specific terms, so that the commission can understand that as it's outlined now. It's sort of some future document that would come forward between the city and the developer. But staff felt the commission would want to see that in advance before you authorize this annexation. And so more work around that would need to be addressed. As far as the affordable housing and the regional housing needs, we simply note that we are in the 6th housing cycle of that arena allocation. The EIR largely relies on the 5th cycle and meeting those. So we wanted more information about how the city is achieving its 6th cycle arena numbers, and whether or not this project is helping to offset any of that. And ultimately, acknowledging that as territory comes out of the county and into the city, there may be a transfer of those RENA allocations as a potential. And that conversation would largely get picked up through a property tax negotiation process. And so it's just to advise them that they ought to be mindful of that and see how that plays out throughout this process. There was a letter submitted by County Fire that addresses some fire concern service needs. And so one of our factors is that any affected agencies' comments be part of the conversation. And so that County Fire is an affected agency in this process. And so we need to know more about how fire services will be accomplished as this project proceeds through the process. And then lastly was about this notion of an alternatives analysis that put the city in the seat of being the full service provider. Largely that is rooted in some conversations in a dialogue between the city manager and myself about how the city has seen other projects come forward on the heels of development being approved and built, and then ultimately being annexed into the city that didn't meet city standards or had to be annexed into the city because of some failed system that was designed along the way. And the city wanted to be in a more position of being out front of those types of scenarios so that all of that development would meet city standards, would be contemplated within the city's infrastructure and their needs, and they can build out their system with that in mind. And so if that is the, which makes logical sense, but if that is a scenario that they want to contemplate, then I felt like this is one of the projects at the start of this where we may want to understand how the city can be in a position to provide those services as a full city service provider. As it sits, the model is to have 4 different separate providers, one for water, one for wastewater, one for fire, and then the city provide all other services. And so any information that we can garner that helps the commission understand how services will be provided, what the capabilities of those services are, and the capacities that we have meets the tenets of the provisions that we typically ask for. And so that's the outline of the letter that staff has prepared. This is placed on the agenda for the commission to look at those informational needs, expand, subtract any of those needs, but not to consider the project and its merits. So we're not discussing the merits of the project per se. We're just trying to drill down what are the informational needs from this commission standpoint so that we can prepare that in a letter and submit that to the city by the deadline of March 7th. That is staff's presentation for this item.
Commissioner Stark.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I got this right. We have not sent the letter yet, is that correct?
That is correct.
And it is for the commission to consider authorizing you to send the letter as we sit here now, right?
Correct.
Now, as to the project itself, am I correct that this is a key site in the Orcutt area and was considered in the Orcutt Committee Community Plan in 1997, right? I think I was painfully aware of that. It's in the city of Santa Maria's sphere of influence, is that correct?
All correct so far.
So what would have to happen is the city of Santa Maria would be the lead agency for the environmental review, and we're a responsible agency because ultimately they would have to have our approval for annexation. Is that correct?
All correct. The exception I would note is this specific concept of development was not contemplated in the Orcutt Community Plan.
This is different.
This is slightly different, and this is the city's version of what they'd like to see, or the developer's version presented to the city, I should clarify.
Commissioner Guyer.
And I'm assuming that we do have an application for this?
We do not have an application for this.
We do not.
We are responding in the capacity of a responsible agency, anticipation of an application. And so rather than let the EIR be adopted and certified and not meet the full needs of the commission, we are acting in an earlier capacity to ask that that EIR fully document the information needs that the commission wants.
So I guess my next question would be is, do we have that type of authority to respond when we don't even have an application?
Yes, we do under the California Environmental Quality Act.
And I have just a quick question before Commissioner Nelson. Do the people of Orcutt who live here have any say in whether they get annexed or not?
Well, I'll answer it in this sense. The city council, the planning commission and city council still has yet to take this up for a public item. So the community of Orcutt has public comment period in which they can express their concerns through that public process. They also have LAFCO's process when it ultimately does become a project to express their concerns and issues.
And
At the end of the day, they do not have a vote as to whether or not they get annexed or not. Once the commission has made a decision,
so,
you're
so
not
in other words, community sentiment is not a factor. that
community
the-
sentiment is a
that
factor
LAFCO
that LAFCO considers.
It is, okay.
It is a factor.
That's what I wanted to be clear about. Now, Commissioner Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hartman. And want to piggyback on some of the questions from my colleagues, and I just want to make sure everybody understands at this point. The City Council in the City of Santa Maria has not taken any actions on this at all. There's been no policy direction from the city.
Other than to authorize the preparation of the draft environmental impact report.
So, and that was done by the City Council.
That was done by the City Council.
Okay. Do we have anybody from the city here today that's going to be speaking on this item, the study session?
Or Commissioner Patino?
We have a commissioner from the city. I'm not sure they're prepared to speak on that.
Okay.
To my knowledge, staff was not participating in this study session. We do have the developers team. They are prepared to provide a presentation.
And the reason why a developer can initiate this is in part because it's in the sphere of influence for the City of Santa Maria.
Well, in any application to LAFCO or any future application to LAFCO, the landowner developer can always petition to LAFCO to file for an annexation. Our preference is that the annexing agency become the lead agency and solicit through a resolution of application. The city has heard LAFCO's concern in that and have chosen to follow suit and have the city become the applicant rather than the landowner.
So the city has become the applicant.
They are scheduled to become the applicant. They are not the applicant yet.
But that will have to happen through a City Council vote?
That will happen through a city council vote when they initiate and pre-zone the site.
And and that will happen after the CEQA process is complete?
In concurrent with the CEQA process. When they adopt that CEQA analysis, it will come with the action for them to initiate the application.
And what's the discretion of the City Council at that time?
They have full discretion.
Full discretion. So they can adopt the EIR, but at the same time reject the idea of an application?
They can.
Okay. And then at that point, they would not necessarily forward that to LAFCO? Right, it would.
They would, ultimately, that would be forwarded to LAFCO, right? So that the direction would be, if they want to initiate this application through a resolution, their staff would then forward that application and submit.
Could a developer move without the City Council?
The developer could move without the city council.
Okay, interesting. All right, thank you.
But in that case, if I might follow through, it would be LAFCO's decision then.
It always falls on LAFCO to make the final decision of annexation. If the developer chose to initiate without the city, LAFCO will reach out to the city as to whether or not they support that decision, one. Two, provide the city or provide LAFCO with the city's plan for services on how they want to do that. And three, what the pre-zoning of that site is. So at some point, the city has to get involved. It would not necessarily be allowed the applicant to just drive the full process itself, but they can be the spearheader of the application if they so choose. If the council chose to not be the applicant, but yet still pre-zone and provide a plan for service and adopt a CEQA document, the applicant can still move forward as, the developer team can still move forward as the applicant. If that kind of splits the atom of who can be the applicant and how. But ultimately, the city does have to provide that pre-zoning, and ultimately, the city will be in negotiations for a property tax exchange as they move through the annexation process. So
if this area was outside of the sphere of influence, how would this process change?
the process would essentially follow the same steps. The added component would be the commission would act on the sphere amendment request along with the annexation. So they'd be concurrently running that process at the same time.
And my understanding is the sphere of influence, I think from the developer's presentation, was done in 1977, where the entire community of Orchid was put into the sphere of influence for?
Yeah, you may know more,
All right.
more accurate than I. I know it's been there since at least the 80s, maybe 77 as well.
And the idea at that time is that potentially the city of Santa Maria might be the best entity to serve that community with these basic services, and that's why you would be put into a sphere of influence, anticipating.
Yeah, I think
future
generally,
annexation.
as through the chair, as we discussed as to why the commission amends spheres of influence, is the improbable physical boundary of that agency. So in this case, it was most likely that the city of Santa Maria would expand into its sphere of influence territory over time, and that the right timing of it, at the right time when they have the adequate services and infrastructure to do so, would be the forethought on that.
And is that something that's discussed at the city level through like their general plan process?
Oftentimes, the cities will contemplate through their general plan process. They often will seek areas beyond their city boundaries about where their future growth might exist. They often include existing sphere territory and any new boundaries they may want to seek.
So as we have this study session and have this conversation, I'd be really interested in hearing from the city of Santa Maria on what their intentions are with the sphere of influence that exists. It seems like after 45 years that, if that was a high priority, that there would be maybe a plan in place. I mean, that might be enough time, I don't know. And so maybe understanding that a little bit better may be helpful for this commission as we start to have some of these discussions on what their intentions are or not. And then, that's where those municipal service reviews are really important, because if it's no longer a priority or a plan, then, this is what we're supposed to be doing up here, is providing good governance. And this might be something that's a legacy issue. This is something that predates the Orchid Community Plan, which was a service delivery process by the county to the Orchid community. And so I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't visited at that point when the Orchid Community Plan was adopted, that they didn't come to LAFCO and revisit the relationship between the city of Santa Maria and Orchid. But we are where we are today, and we'll looking forward to providing some additional comments.
Commissioner Guyer.
So on this agenda item, we're not asked for any action, is that correct?
Staff is asking that you authorize me to release the letter with any additional edits. Typically, staff would send the letter on our own, but in this case, I felt the project was important enough that we elevate it to the commission for consideration of the informational needs, largely because if the city does proceed with an application, the items that I've listed in our informational needs will be items that the executive officer will ask for as part of their application that are not necessarily specified in our application process.
Commissioner Nelson?
Thank you, Chair Hartman, and sorry, Commissioner Takis, for jumping in there. And I wanted to thank you for that, because I do think this gives us an opportunity. I appreciate you guys' indulgence on this. This is something I do think that it's worth elevating to this conversation. I think there is a lot of comments that LAFCO can provide in advance of this as the city of Santa Maria contemplates this annexation, and also gives the community an outlet to have some of these discussions. There's been a lot of frustration that I've heard from my constituents that this is happening, and there's a perception that it's a foregone conclusion. And so I think the public seeing that this process roll out in front of them, I think is an important part of allowing us to see what's necessary for eventually getting to that annexation, if that's to happen. As I've talked to some of the people in my community, I've often said this is the first inning in a 9-inning game. And so it's a long process that's going to take quite some time. I think we've seen with the Bailey Avenue corridor, that's something that's been in application for 30 plus years. Sometimes, I'm sure developers hope that it moves faster than that, but sometimes these things can be very lengthy. And so I think getting an opportunity to comment it early in the process is helpful for the public's understanding.
So now I think we have a good, Commissioner, okay.
If you're done. Okay, so I have a couple questions as the new guy here. And forgive me if I go outside my scope, because I'm still kind of trying to conceptualize my role. So there was some reference to RENA and the sixth cycle. I just want to get clear on a couple things for myself. Is this site currently in the county's housing element for the sixth cycle?
Yes.
Okay. When the city of Santa Maria begins their process, assuming they do go through their process of going to the Santa Maria Planning Commission and then the city council, would that discussion have any component to it about trying to meet their RENA numbers with this project for their own sixth cycle, or would, based on the timeline, first inning of a 9-inning game, would we be more realistically looking down the road at a seventh cycle RENA for Santa Maria?
That is a good question, through the chair. I believe they will.
Excuse me, this is Commissioner Patino. I couldn't hear all of that last part about the RENA numbers.
I can repeat the question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, one more time for folks in back. I'll be a little louder. So my question was, realistically, given that this project is currently in the county housing element for the sixth cycle, and given that this is the beginning of a very long process that'll go to the Santa Maria Planning Commission, City Council, eventually LAFCO becomes a responsible agency and we go through that dance, how realistic is it that this project could make its way into a future city of Santa Maria for the sixth cycle, or are we more realistically looking at this becoming part of a seventh cycle for the city of Santa Maria if it did go to its full conclusion?
I can probably answer that for you right now because we're not counting this project on our RENA numbers. So we're going to be fine without it.
Okay. And then,
But this still needs to go to the Planning Commission. It needs to go to the City Council. There's no application to LAFCO at this point.
okay. And then my second question is really more logistical, because there was some reference in the documents that we've received to comments from the County Fire Department from Rob Heckman. So I just want to get a sense logistically, to this location, to this site, what is the closest fire station? Is it a county fire station? Is it a City of Santa Maria fire station? Because to a certain extent, whoever's closest oftentimes gets the first responsibility to respond.
Yeah, another good question. I believe, as documented in the EIR, the county station, new station would be the closest. County is contemplating a new station in Orcutt.
Okay, so theoretically, if this went to its logical conclusion, got through all the hurdles, it would potentially be served by the City of Santa Maria, but County of Santa Maria would be, the County of Santa Barbara, excuse me, would be closer, physically closer in terms of being able to respond, but the property tax components of it would go to the City of Santa Maria to help fund things like their own fire services and other functions. I'm just trying to understand how that would work.
Yeah, I think physically, as the crow flies, the county station would be closest. The city, I think, is still contemplating how it can best utilize its existing stations to provide that service. But ultimately, all fire departments have mutual aid agreements. And so the first responder will likely be a county station under that mutual aid agreement. The property tax is a negotiated process that has yet to be ran. So we don't know where that divide of property will wind up.
They would have a chance to work out.
They will have a
kind of
chance to work
equitable-
that out. That'll all be resolved as part of this application in the future. That resolution will be presented to the commission for your understanding of how it works.
Okay. Do we have an idea if the difference in distance is a significant difference? I recognize that that's a very, that's an open to interpretation kind of a question, but I mean, is it a significant difference in terms of response times, 1 minute, 2 minute?
Yeah, that's all outlined in the draft EIR. Essentially, the city has a Station 6, which is out in the airport. That is close enough, that meets all of the timeframes. They just, as documented, do not staff it fully for purposes outside of they don't attend needs levels of services outside of the airport.
Thank you. That's it for my questions.
Of course, Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you. And I just, since this is my backyard, I know an answer to that question. They also can't dispatch from that location in part because they have to serve the fire. They have to be at the airport as flights are coming in and out. The nearest station is the one over by Ron Ventura Park, which is 3.3 miles away, versus a half mile where the station is. That's contemplated to be built by the county. Also another, as far as we look at services, I just did a quick look, and it's 0.8 miles to our county substation, the Sheriff's Department, and it's at 3.8 miles to the city's police department. So just kind of comparing those distances.
I just had, those property tax agreements, are those in perpetuity, typically?
Typically, they can be renegotiated. We often do not see those happen.
Okay. Let's see. So we've really talked a lot about process and understanding our role and how this discussion will unfold. I think the other order of business is, are there other items of information that we want to see? And the developer is here, and I believe you said that the developer would be willing to talk more about the project if we wanted. Is that?
Yeah, and we still need to take public comment.
Yeah.
So I think through that process, they can express their...
Through public comment. All right, that's fine. So are there, just before we go to public comment, are there any more thoughts? Commissioner Richardson.
I noticed that the airport land use plan was mentioned, but it's not in your letter anywhere. Is there any relationship to that part of the thing? What impact the airport land use plan would have on the project?
It is discussed and is a component of the project, and they have weighed in. As I reviewed, I didn't feel there was any missing information. There just needs to be a decision by the Land Use Commission and the city as to what that would be. I didn't feel there was a missing information piece there. That's still a factor for the commission. Ultimately, when the commission weighs the merits of the project, flight paths and land use commission decisions will be part of that factor that the commission gets to weigh in on. But all of that is sort of raised and flushed out through the documents that we've seen so far. And so you'll have that information in front of you.
Commissioner Guyer?
Well, I appreciate all the information that we've received. I myself am very uncomfortable.
I think you don't have your, we want to catch every word.
All right. I appreciate the information that we've received. I did have a little bit of a hard time trying to find that state clearinghouse for the EIR, which I never succeeded, but I am a little challenged with the electronics. But I'm uncomfortable with LAFCO taking an action when we don't have an application.
Mr. Prater, did you want to address that? I mean, we're not really taking an action today other than giving direction on information we would find valuable to our eventual decision. Is that correct?
That is correct. So you're giving staff direction to submit this letter to the city.
Well, then I'll include direction in my uncomfortableness. I feel like we're getting ahead of an application. For me, an application initiates everything.
Well, that's a perspective. We don't have as much information on exactly the kind of process that will unfold, but I do think I like. We were talking earlier about the municipal service reviews and kind of letting people know ahead of time, creating expectations, and I think this process allows the same. So personally, I like. I mean, we don't have all the information, but I think we are able to weigh in. Is the draft EIR enough, or is there more we would like to know? So, Commissioner Freeman.
Does an application require a finalized EIR?
Yes.
Okay. So the issue that I have then with that's the wrong way to start that sentence. So the reason why I think this may be worthwhile to participate a little bit in this process is that otherwise, if we're unwilling to participate in what information we would like to see in an EIR, we end up in everyone ends up in this weird like catch-22 where they have to essentially guess everything that we want to know and then put that in the EIR, and then we end up coming to us, and then we end up saying, oh, we're going to reject the application because we didn't know this one thing that you should put in the EIR. So, yeah.
But is there anything we want that we're not seeing? All right, Commissioner Nelson.
Well, yeah, the answer to that question is yes. There's things in here that we're not seeing. I would like to go over those, but do want to hear from the public and potentially the applicant before we get into those things.
So let's turn to public comment.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, I will begin public comment with a letter that was sent in, asked to be read into the record, sent in by Donna Pulling. Dear commission members, I oppose the high-density development at Union Valley and Highway 135 known as Richards Ranch for all the reasons listed in the February issue of the Orchid Pioneer by Steve Southwick, which are increased burden on traffic, schools, roads, police, and fire, library, parks, loss of eucalyptus, and most importantly, number 6, the Orchid Community Plan adopted to provide county guidance for development in the Orchid community would not apply. I would like to see provisions added to the development plan that add incentives for use of public transportation for residents of the 400 apartments and 95 homes to reduce the traffic impact of approximately 1,000 more vehicles in the area. Incentives such as bus passes or electric bike allowances, carpooling coordination. I encourage the developer to work with the Regional Transit Authority to develop a strategy to address this concern. We will now go to Zoom with Ken Huff, to be followed by Cliff Solomon. Mr. Huff?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hartman and commissioners. I'm Ken Huff, Executive Director with Santa Barbara County Action Network. We're very interested in this project. We've hosted a roundtable discussion about it, attended some community meetings, and our board met at the end of January, and they had concerns about it, and they felt that it ought to remain under the county jurisdiction rather than to be annexed. We understand the land will ultimately be developed. It's been planned for a long time, and we're not opposed to that. But we have concerns that'll be addressed in the environmental, as the environmental process unfolds. We share the concerns that are raised in the staff report about the confusion, having several, I guess, 4 different service providers. My board didn't address that they hadn't seen the letter that your staff has written. It's an excellent letter, I believe, and I would encourage that if you're going to authorize the staff to send it, that you do so. I understand that that's something that's not within the purview, or you don't want to take that action and rather leave it to your board. The loss of the eucalyptus trees is of great concern to us. The monarch butterflies are a big deal to us, and I don't know, I haven't been out there to see if there are monarchs in those trees, but they are up here in Lake Marie, and they are along the coast. And so that's a concern that'll be addressed as the thing moves forward. But again, our board felt that at what they know to date, rather not have it be annexed. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Huff.
We will now go to Cliff Solomon on Zoom, to be followed in Santa Barbara by Adolph Schur.
Yes, I'd like to comment on the proposed annexation of the Richards Ranch by the city of Santa Maria. Although I am not against a controlled development of the area, I firmly believe that the land needs to continue to be in county control rather than city. I live near the proposed development and have been following the project closely. I know that we are in a very preliminary stage in the process, but wanted to list several of my concerns. If this land is annexed by the city, we Orchid residents would lose control of an area that impacts our daily lives and commutes. It reminds me of the old adage, taxation without representation. I'm worried about how the work will impact the current nature environment. There are monarch butterflies, great horned owls, and other animals who live in the woods. If the eucalyptus trees in the area are cut down, it will destroy the current habitat. We must control the building of fast food restaurants on the triangular, I think they're called teardrop areas, formed by the borders of Orchid Road and 135. Any new restaurants would greatly impact the traffic patterns of that area and an area that already has significant problems. Plus, these lots are not big enough for any buildings and necessary parking. I'm also concerned about the building density of the project. Traffic in that area is already a nightmare at times, and the proposed density will only increase the problems. Yes, we need to build additional housing as the state demands, but it must be carefully monitored, and changes to the traffic infrastructure must be modified to meet the increased need. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now go to Adolf Scheer, to be followed by Michael Stolte.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I've been a resident of Orchid for the last 25 years. Previously, I was a resident of Santa Maria for the last 10 years previous to that. And we came up here to go to school and loved it and have never gone left. So in 25 years of living right off the Orchid frontage road, I walk there I try to do it every day, but I walk past us every day. And I've brought my kids there to see the butterflies, my grandkids there. When they come, we know, let's go to Pismo Beach because that's where the big ones are going to be, or the big herd, flock, whatever you call them. And anyhow, the traffic on the 135, Foster Road, Lakeview Road is horrendous. There's been at least 2 major accidents where multiple people have died, both at Foster and 135. No, that was Union Valley Parkway. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. At Union Valley Parkway and 135, there was a major accident a couple of years ago. 2 people died. And then at Lakeview, Santa Maria Way and 135, multiple, actually 2 parents of the only kids, that was their parents. They lost both of them. And right now, the city of Santa Maria already has 1,811 apartments on their plan. I looked it up this morning to build in the city of Santa Maria. And then they want to build 400 more apartments on this piece of land in Orchid. And it's going to have a huge impact on it. Right across from my little market, they're putting in 164 apartments. And then less than a mile from that, they're putting in another 140 apartments. And then a quarter mile away, 387 apartments. So they're impacting our community tremendously. And the roads aren't getting any, it takes me 3 lights sometimes to get onto 135 because of the amount of traffic that's coming out of this area. And if you put in 500 more dwellings for people to live there, I don't know when I'm gonna have to leave to get to work. Or maybe I'll have to go all the way to the freeway and come down Clark because Union Valley, Foster Road, and Lakeview are extremely congested. And there's always, every week, I see new glass at the corner of Lakeview and 135 from car accidents, because that's my local market that I go to. And every week there's new glass. There's another accident, another accident, another accident. So annexing this into the city of Santa Maria, when the city of Santa Maria, as I laid it out this morning, has all this land over by Tanglewood area that is already zoned for all the housing that they want. They already have this land, they have all this land, they have multiple places where they can go, and I don't see a need for them to annex our land into the city. We chose to to move to Orchid because of the area between the housing and the school districts and the nature of the community, and that's why we left Santa Maria. And trying to bring this into Santa Maria, they're gonna just try to crowd it as it is. Both of our children have grown up there and now live in the city of Santa Maria. And the parking in their area is ridiculous. You can't, I have to drop my wife off and drive around a couple of blocks till I can find a spot to park to go to their house, because the city of Santa Maria zoning made these low-income housing projects to help the community, which I'm all in favor to help the community. But my daughter's paying $3,500 for a two-bedroom apartment. I don't see that as low-income housing. And there's no parking, off-street parking for them at all. So I totally oppose this. Let Orchid be Orchid. Let the city of Santa Maria use what land it already has. And let us stay in the county and keep the quality of life that we have. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I should say we normally give 3 minutes. Our timer isn't working, so nobody can see, but our clerk is keeping count. So if you can keep your remarks around 3 minutes, that would be much
Sorry about
appreciated.
that. So I have an additional 3 minutes? Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Would you fill out a speaker form and we'll include you in public comment?
We will now go to Michael Stolte, to be followed by Lori.
Good afternoon, Lori Tamura. I'm wondering if you can pull up the slide. Thank you very much. Lori Tamura with Urban Planning Concepts, resident of Orchid, and working with Michael Stolte on this project. And we, as this is a study session and as a land use planner, we have to put a PowerPoint presentation together. So this is a presentation that we have been showing the community when we have group meetings. And so we hope that this will help explain how we got here. Oops. It's always, I'm also love history and how communities grow. This particular plan is from 1963. And it was a collaboration between the city of Santa Maria and the county of Santa Barbara to put a land plan together when Highway 101 was built. Broadway was the main drive through the heart of Santa Maria and Little Orchid. At that time in 1963, it was about 35,000 people in Santa Maria, about 8,000 people in Orchid. And so it was a collaboration, and where you see right there at the end of the flight path of the runway is the Richards property. In 1997 was the first work with spheres of influence, and the Santa Maria included Orchid in the sphere of influence because that's the logical growth of urban development. And the sphere of influence runs along Rice Ranch Road and the south side of Orchid. Oh, and that was updated by LAFCO in 2012. This property is served already today by various entities. One of them is Golden State, and Golden State Water Company does extend its service area into the city of Santa Maria to provide certain neighborhoods with water. So there is already a mutual relationship between the city and Golden State to provide water in the urban area. Laguna County Sanitation also provides services to a small portion of the city of Santa Maria, around Santa Maria Way and some other areas. It also serves the neighborhood right across the street of 135 that's already in the city of Santa Maria, Foxtonwood Townhomes, which was annexed about 20 years ago to the city of Santa Maria. The Orchid area is also served by CSA 5 and a lighting district. And so this is another layer of services that are provided through districts that have been established for the Orchid area. So one of the comments that was made in the LAFCO presentation and letter was efficiency of services. And so right now, everything in Orchid is served by Laguna County Sanitation, Golden State Water. They're served by CSA 5. When a development happens, they have to annex to Service Area 5 to provide things like landscaping and lighting districts. And then there's a lighting district also. Then you have the fire district and the sheriff district. And then, of course, county roads takes care of the roads throughout the area. So in the future, as annexations go forward, the city of Santa Maria would be taking over almost all of those responsibilities except for water and sewer. So it is a more efficient facility for future development of this area. This project is part of the Orchid Community Plan that was adopted in 1997. It's Key Site 26. And here's the challenge. WADO 2. I mean, some of the board members have heard of this. Any development in the Orchid area is required to provide supplemental water to the project before it can be developed. Right now, the supplemental water is provided by the city of Santa Maria. And every project, even an accessory dwelling unit, has to go and get an authorization of water from the city to Golden State in order to hook up. And so the whole issue is about water, and we know that. And so the city of Santa Maria is the supplemental water provider, and but they also have a policy that they will not give water or sell water to a developer that has a commercial project in it. So this is the challenge. This site right now in the Orchid Community Plan has two different designations on it. One of them is for commercial, the land use designation is commercial, office professional, residential, high density residential. The zoning on it is all C2. And so if somebody wanted to develop this site now, they have to go to the city of Santa Maria to do a commercial project. They'd have to purchase the water from the city first. And what's really important is that we have a service desert along Union Valley Parkway. All of the commercial developments are on Clark Avenue, either at Clark and Bradley or Clark and 101, which is the white circles are the half-mile, 1-mile radiuses from each one of these commercial areas. Clark and 101, there's commercially designated land, and there's a small commercial center being built right now. Obviously, you have Clark and Bradley intersection where our major grocery store is for 35,000 people. And then you have Old Town Orchid. And you can see the half-mile and 1-mile radiuses from those commercial centers. Then you have Spencer's Market at the top. And then on the other side towards 101 is Key Site 25, which was a commercial center proposed about 20 years ago. And it actually ended up getting annexed to the city of Santa Maria because the city of Santa Maria would not provide water. The Adam piece, which is the one we're talking about, has yet to be developed. So right now, Union Valley Parkway, which it's this stretch right along in here, you can see none of the circles overlap each other, and our project's right there in the center. We're proposing to put a commercial neighborhood center there. The EIR, which is this document, says this is a huge reduction in vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions because people will be able to walk and ride bikes and move through this area much more efficiently, especially because you have about 10,000 people on Union Valley, or cars on Union Valley Parkway on a daily basis driving by, and it would be on their daily trips. So we're proposing a commercial center at the top, multifamily apartments, and then townhomes, nice townhomes buffering the residential to the south. And so the next one. One of the questions that came up was the flight path of the airport. The Airport Land Use Commission just adopted the new plan. Zone 4 is the area that is going across the portion of the residential. And so all of our design for the residential is outside of the Zone 4. Zone 2 allows for commercial development to occur within it, not residential. So we've been working with this process, monitoring the Airport Land Use Plan, and we will need to have review by the Airport Land Use Commission before the project goes to the Planning Commission. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to talk faster. So last point here is the Orchid Community Plan. As part of the housing element, we're all trying to deal with RENA numbers and development. Right now, the county is proposing this property for 562 units, all residential, no commercial. They're also proposing, they're also proposing all of this other residential in this core area for about 1,400 units without any commercial being proposed. So we have this conundrum of providing a well-planned, mixed-use infill development, and we need water to meet all of the county policies and city policies. And that's the driving force for moving forward with this annexation request. I do want to note also that there are a number of review that we're going to be going through. Obviously, Airport Land Use Commission, we have the Planning Commission, City Council, we have the tax exchange agreement, which we really didn't talk too much about here, but that does go to both the City Council and the Board of Supervisors to negotiate the final transactions, and then back to LAFCO. So we have a long process ahead of us, and Michael does want to say a few things.
And Commissioner Nelson had some questions.
Yeah, I had a question for the agent for the applicant. You said that the city won't provide water for commercial uses. Is that correct?
For commercials of this size.
Okay. So aren't they providing significantly more water to Napomo for their commercial project?
That's a separate negotiated agreement through the adjudication of the groundwater basin, and the transaction that occurred there was they're selling it to Napomo Community Service District, and Napomo is the one that's allocating the water to certain projects.
And if they were to provide water to Golden State Water, that's the same process that happens for any development, right? Is that they provide the water to the water purveyor, and the water purveyor provides the water to...
Correct.
So that same thing happens. It's just they won't do it to Orchid. They will do it to another jurisdiction. Is that what I understand? They will provide their policy. They won't provide supplemental water to commercial and Orchid, is what you're saying?
So again, it's two different entities that you're talking about. The agreement with the Napomo Community Service District was adjudicated. The transaction is between the City of Santa Maria and Twitchell Water Authority to convey the water to the Napomo Community Service District for their overdrafted portion of the basin. They put in the pipeline under the river. 2,500 acre feet is the transaction that's currently being moved forward by 2025. Okay. And the district is the one that will allocate the water to the projects.
Just like Golden State would for this project.
If the city, but the City of Santa Maria will not give you the certificate.
Okay, just understanding, making sure there was two classes there, as I understood. Was there ever considered, instead of going down the route with the city on this for supplemental water, maybe looking at recycled water or doing some kind of other project so that the water could be something that did not need supplemental water from the City of Santa Maria?
There's a number of thoughts about how additional water could be allocated throughout the county, the city, recycled water, reclaimed water, re-injected water. All of those have been considered. And right now, there's no method for that to be validated for this project. The current transaction is through the City of Santa Maria.
The current chosen pathway?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So in closure, we have reviewed the letter that your staff has prepared, and we understand it, and we agree that it should become part of this public record. And thank you very much for your time, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you.
Michael.
I don't need it. Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for hosting us. I am the applicant. Joan, I wanted to quickly clarify something. So one thing that I heard was that that there would be citizens that would be involved in this annexation. The property that we're proposing, the annexation that we're proposing, that we've requested to the city of Santa Maria to be annexed, is dirt, right? So it's 43 acres of dirt that currently resides on the border of the city of Santa Maria and the border of the community of Orchid. Also, I wanted to clarify that the county housing element, which tagged our site, took place after we requested annexation. As the applicant, I'm a local product of the Central Coast and lived in Old Town Orchid until very recently. The entire development team is in fact local. As local developers, we are committed to honoring the region's history and heritage. We plan to incorporate agrarian architecture, open spaces, and landscaping buffers into our project. Our primary goal is to address the housing and commercial shortage in the area while also preserving its character. To achieve this goal, we propose building for-sale townhomes at lower densities, approximately 14 units per acre, when the allowed use is about 22 units per acre, along the perimeter of the site that borders existing residential neighborhoods. We recognize the project may change existing setting of the neighborhood, and we are committed to incorporating lower densities. To address housing needs, we propose higher densities for rent apartments in areas of the project that are adjacent to urban infrastructure, such as Union Valley Parkway and Highway 135. As these areas are not well suited for low density housing. We also plan to include commercial services along intensive infrastructure roads and in safety zones that are suitable for commercial but not residential housing. One of the items that comes up regularly when we work with the locals is the fact that why don't we just do a full housing development? Because of the airport's proximity to the property, there are quite a few zones on the property that are not appropriate for housing. The Orchid Community Plan stipulates that no commercial development can take place without sourcing supplemental water from outside of the basin. Despite working with the county to explore options for procuring water for the commercial, there are currently no short-term or mid-term solutions that would allow our property to fulfill its zoned intent for the community. Our goal is to provide much-needed housing and services to the community that is currently unable to develop under the Orchid Community Code. The only remedy for us is to pragmatically, and I do not take that lightly, pragmatically annex our property into the city of Santa Maria, which has access to water and can support the intended residential and commercial development of the property. As the annexation applicant, we understand the importance of complying with LAFCO requirements and demonstrating how our urban infill project, located adjacent to the border of Santa Maria, meets the annexation criteria. We will show that our project will benefit the Santa Maria Basin by providing much-needed mixed-use development that meets the intent of the Orchid Community Plan that has been in place for 25 years. We will also address any concerns raised by LAFCO regarding the project's ability to meet existing boundaries, the property's ability to provide urban services, and consistency with the adopted spheres of influence and general plans. Thank you for this workshop. We have reviewed the comment letter from the staff, and we feel it is appropriate to forward to the city staff.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions for me?
I don't see any lights. Oh, Commissioner Guyer?
In your presentation, you used the word you're the applicant. Who have you applied to?
So we have applied for annexation.
To whom?
The city of Santa Maria.
The city of Santa Maria. Santa Maria then hasn't gone forward with that application to LAFCO, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes,
or-
Thank you, Chair Hartman. As today is talking about environmental impacts and looking at the CEQA document, could you speak just for a little bit about the work you guys did on site prior to your application with the grading and the removal of habitat?
So we have not done any grading on the site. We annually receive letters from the fire department for fire preparation and things like that. Since we've owned the site, there have actually been 4 fires on the site. Unfortunately, we've had a homeless encampment issue that has taken place. And so what we regularly do is we disc the property on an annualized basis in the spring, which is regular and not only done by us, but most government entities in the area. It's commonly done.
One last question. I understand you guys purchased this from another entity recently. Are there any deed restrictions on the property? Are there any limitations to what you guys are able to develop here?
Absolutely. There are actually quite a few deed restrictions on the property. We purchased the property from Walmart in 2021. Actually, I would like to note that Walmart, for quite some time, was working on plans for this property. To put it in a perspective, Walmart wanted to put a 156,000 square foot supercenter on this site with no residential housing. The only reason that they were not able to do that was because of the water issue that was taking place. Walmart decided to buy a different property in the city of Santa Maria and established its commercial center there. Back to your original question, Mr. Nelson, Walmart regularly, when they sell properties, puts an extensive amount of deed restrictions on the site. In this particular case, I can't list all of them off the top of my head, but some of the restrictions include pharmacy. A lot of Walmart likes to have kind of a, without judgment from myself, kind of a holistic view, and so I think that you can't have like
Non-compete.
Non-compete. Oh well, what I was really going to say is like they restrict pornographic type of activities and things like that on the site. I believe that is restricted. You can't have a pharmacy on the site, and it is restricted that grocers competing on discounted grocers competing with Walmart, they would not approve. Does that answer your question?
So there would be about a grocery on site as an option?
So our primary focus is to put a grocer on site. We're actually in talks with multiple specialty type grocers that would be a fantastic fit for Orchid, and there's a lot of interest from them.
Great, thank you.
And while we have you, recreation and trails, given that you've got townhouses and apartments, and what kind of recreational amenities are you planning in the development?
That is a great question. It's a lot. You don't happen to have it, do you? So one of the things that took place is there's this balance of providing housing. That last one way. There you go. Go back. Go back. Is this, as a local developer, I respect the fact that we don't want sprawl. We have, in this particular case, an infill property that is surrounded by significant road structure. So it allows an opportunity for dense housing to solve some of our California housing crisis issues. At the same time, we engage quite a bit with the local community, and we've just started, but largely the feedback that we receive is that they don't want extremely high density housing, and so we have to balance that. And so what we have done is take mid density housing, even though it's zoned R3 for high density housing, we've actually allocated 100 townhomes at what classifies as mid density around the entire perimeter of the property to graduate that density, to try to be good neighbors to the current residential neighborhoods. Only after those 100 townhomes, which is about 9.7 acres, is a higher density neighborhood put in place, both of which right now at least are planned to be gated. That higher density neighborhood is about at 22 units per acre, which I would like to state that right now, the county's housing element has this site tagged to be a minimum density of 30 units per acre up to a maximum density of 40 units per acre. So we are proposing a development of about 500 units, and that would be a housing element of approximately 1,200 to 1,500 units. Significantly different project. But back to the original question of amenities, Lori, unfortunately, I'm just going to ad-lib it, but it's extensive. It's a pool and cabana area. It has a full recreational running area around the entire development. It has a dog run, pet spa, workout areas, full
And
clubhouse.
if I might, but it's gated, so it's only for the residents who live there. It's not for the public.
That's
Is
a
that
great
correct?
question. That's to be determined, and that frankly is something that we've been talking with the public quite a bit about, is to try to figure out what is the most appropriate there. Obviously, it's going to be funded by that HOA, and so that HOA is going to have an opinion about that, but that's still open for debate, and we are a long ways out from having that discussion.
Commissioner Nelson? Kyriakos, sorry.
Sorry, we're sharing today. I just wanted to follow up on something that was pointed out by the permit agent, by the developer's agent. So you noted that the project is about 1.1 miles from Old Town Orchid. And I'm just wondering, given the amount of commercial real estate that's being proposed conceptually here, recognizing there's still a ways to go, what is your, especially also given that Walmart was at one point involved in this parcel, what is your vision for the mix, and how does that comport with having Old Town Orchid and all the small businesses that are there in such close proximity?
Sure, that's a great question. It's designed, so the amount of commercial that we've designed is actually very small compared to what that site has historically been designed for, even in the Orchid Community Plan. The entire commercial amount, I believe, is about 100,000 square feet. So to put that into perspective, Walmart was going to do a 196,000 square foot store, and that was still going to have about 27 acres of additional commercial around it. So it would have been hundreds of thousands of square feet. In this particular case, we've taken it down to be a neighborhood commercial center. This type of neighborhood commercial center is very similar to the Orchid, or one that is currently in Orchid right now, which is the Albertson Center. And that center is actually considerably closer to Old Town Orchid than this is. So that center already has a much larger impact on Old Town Orchid than this does. But to answer your question, it's predominantly around grocery services, coffee shops, I believe a veterinary clinic, small retail food services. There's a much needed gas station, which would, with the gas station tenants that we are potentially talking to at this time, would at the very least be 50-50 gas and electric charging. So it's really centralized around these neighborhoods. And as you saw from Lori's presentation, there's a huge gap in commercial services in Orchid in this area. And it's really about servicing that gap, whereas Old Town is fairly far away. And I can say that because I lived in Old Town up until 2 years ago. So I'm very familiar with it.
So just to follow up, so your assessment, just so I'm making sure I'm hearing you, so your assessment is that you wouldn't be competing so much with Old Town Orchid, you would be providing value added rather than businesses that would compete with what's offered in Old Town Orchid, as you understand Old Town.
As I understand it, I mean, knowing Old Town Orchid quite well, it has a lot of character. It tends to be artisanal type services and things like that that fits it very well. And it has that amazing old way about it that you can just walk down the street and kind of go service to restaurant to coffee shop, etc. And go ahead.
And then just one last question. So is there a scenario where you could see Walmart coming back into this project with a smaller, non-supercenter site?
I will not sell it to Walmart.
Thank you.
Commissioner Freeman.
So about 40 minutes ago, and I'm not certain if disagreed is the right word, but I disagreed with Commissioner Geyer about his uncomfortable. What does it mean to disagree with his uncomfortableness? But like I had expressed that I did feel comfortable, and now I regret that for what it's worth, and I apologize to you. I guess the thing that I'm seeing here is that we're essentially going down a discussion about the merits of a potential development project as opposed to what we would like to see out of the EIR, and we're going deeper and deeper into the discussion about what kinds of facilities will be on there. And I know that wasn't even the question that you would exactly asked, but then we were talking about swimming pools and all sorts of things. And I feel like we are. I'm not even certain if this is a LAFCO question at that point, even with an application. But we don't have an application, and I'm now with Craig on this one.
Well, the workshop is almost over. Commissioner Stark.
I was going to suggest, I'm happy to, I think that our EO has asked the appropriate questions to get at the information that is relevant to us, unless there's something to add, which I invite people to add it, but I'm prepared to make a motion.
We have one more public comment, so let's wait until public comment close. It is a workshop. I didn't hold people to 3 minutes. I thought it was valuable to get the information. I, for one, am getting a lot of emails, and so I'm glad to have more knowledge about this. So, Madam Clerk.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we will now go to our final speaker, Stephen Teagle. Oh, Teague, sorry, my apologies.
Hi, I just wanted to, I'll keep it short, because I know it's getting late, but, this development, I think the of Orchid, they're not, no one I think is opposed to developing that property. It's like, it's the part where the city, annexes it and takes control of it. Because now, you got community, 3 sides of community that are, and then you got this proposed project right in the middle of it. And I think we feel that, once it gets out of the county's hands, I heard a lot of proposals, propose this, propose that. It sounds like, like Shangri-La, but, once it gets out of the hands of the county, then, we don't have a say in it. And we're all surrounded by it, by 3 sides, And so, that's my biggest concern. There's traffic, there's all kinds of issues. And I heard all the comments, previous, and they were all spot on. There's going to be a really bad traffic area there. I don't know how. I thought I heard somebody speak earlier about reducing the carbon footprint or whatever because there's going to be services here or whatever. But there's also going to be 500 houses and probably over 1,000 more cars right there. So I think that's really the concern. That's my concern. And it doesn't seem like it fits because you got Orchid to the north, to the east, to the south, and then you got 135, Highway 135 to the west. Sure, it connects by, I guess, technically by a boundary or something to some little community over there in Foxenwood, but yeah, and I think I speak for everybody. I don't know anybody who thinks this is a good idea. So that's all I have to say about that.
Well, thank you for taking the time and being here with us today.
Yeah, and it was interesting, and I want to say I was kind of impressed on the Pledge of Allegiance. You don't see. I didn't think they could do that anymore. But anyway, thanks for hearing my comments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So with that, we close public comment, and we're back to the board, and we need to give some direction to our executive officer.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hartman. So I do have some additional comments on the EIR that I think we could add there. One of them is the transportation impact number 1. It says the project would not conflict with the program, plan, ordinance, or policy addressing circulation system, including transit, roadway, bicycle, and pedestrian facilities. And so I brought, I'm a former teacher, so I brought a prop today. I brought the Orchid Community Plan. Right here. And the Orchid Community Plan is a plan for the community of Orchid. It's a programmatic EIR. There's a circulation element. There's a funding source for facilities in Orchid. All of them are pieces that all go into forming Orchid. And the reason why I brought up earlier today was that this was post the sphere of influence change, was in part because what my question on the EIR is, how does this impact the Orchid Community Plan and their programmatic EIR? You take a big chunk, probably the most significant commercial chunk out of the Orchid Community Plan. What does it do to the rest of the plan? What does it do to the circulation element? What does it do to the facilities district? The other questions I have are around housing and population. What does it do for the trail program? All those things in the Orchid Community Plan have fees associated and fee studies associated with future development so that those developments could pay for these future improvements. And so once you take out the big commercial piece of the middle, what does it do to the rest of the plan? So that's a big concern of mine as we move forward, and I think that the city should address that. That would help me understand this project, and I think it'd help the community of Orchid understand this project. The other piece is the Union Valley Parkway extension and overpass. There was another environmental document done for that. And that contemplated the uses that were in the Orchid Community Plan, not the new use. So you have noise studies along Union Valley Parkway. You have the width of Union Valley Parkway. And I think there was a contemplation of being widened at some point in the future, but that was when they were thinking that the development would eventually happen off of Highway 1. Now that there's intensity of development in this area, it should be looked at as well as part of opening that back up and looking at that circulation element and plan as far as Union Valley Parkway is concerned. So that's right in there. It says it's no impact in the EIR. I think the EIR is very faulty in that way. There's significant impact on the Orchid Community Plan if you take out the largest commercial piece of the plan. And it was a balance of jobs and housing. It's all part of the Orchid Community Plan that was looked at. For the record, I do want to correct some things that were said. You know, Walmart never submitted an application. There was never an approved project for this massive supercenter on this location. The county has identified this site not necessarily to be upzoned, but as an option to the Board of Supervisors when we look at our RENA numbers. It is one of the, we actually have overzoned or over-identified parcels in the Orchid community, so it's very likely that this parcel may not be upzoned as part of the housing element. So the idea that we're just going to think that there's no impact there because they're presupposing that the board is going to make some massive upzone in this spot is a little premature. It may be what we do, it may not be what we do. So just going down, as I mentioned before, how does it impact other environmental documents that are in proximity? How does it impact the traffic to noise, circulation element, bicycle and pedestrian, active transportation? As that develops further, there's going to be more traffic down Union Valley Parkway. We already have issues of safety on crossing that. The other side of it is where potentially the students would go to junior high and high school. We also have a high school that's at already 145% in that area, and that needs to be looked at. So as far as the EIR is concerned, it really is underdeveloped when it looks at the community-wide impact, and I think that's what you're hearing from people in Orchid. They're saying, hey, this project doesn't fit with everything around it, and my challenge is to the applicant is to go back and look at these things, and to the city, if they want to annex this, to make sure that it really does fit the surrounding community. The EIR says that there's no additional impact on recreation, says there's no additional impact on the need for police services and police infrastructure. Adding additional residents that were outside the Orchid Community Plan will have an impact. So I don't think that no impact is an appropriate decision for those points in the EIR, so I think that those should be looked at a little bit further. I'll stop there for now.
Commissioner Guyer.
I want to reiterate again my concern over LAFCO maintaining its independence and taking any type of an action that might be looked at by the city of Santa Maria as leading an application. But most of it, between this hearing and the previous month's hearing, I'm really beginning to be concerned about the pull on LAFCO over RENA numbers. They had a speaker that was pretty strong. strong on us in Santa Maria. And when I got done with that, I looked at it and said, that's not part of our purview. Cortese Act may need updating to include some of that, but we're not the body to do that. So I definitely have a concern about that. I am concerned about taking any type of when we don't have an application, I don't feel that we should go forward. I feel that what it does is if the future application comes from Santa Maria, it should be independent. We should be independent. We shouldn't be leading.
Yeah, no, well, that's an interesting policy discussion. Does this mean that you won't be voting to send the letter? So that's I think we've gone through all this. I think we have a lot of things that would be of value if this does come back. But I do think you raise an interesting point for the future. I guess we need a motion and a second and then further discussion about whether we should send the letter or not. Commissioner Stark.
Just for purposes of starting discussion, I would move that we send the letter with the addition of the additional issues, particularly related to the effect on the Orcutt Community Plan as identified by Commissioner Nelson. And I would say in that is, my opinion or impression is, we're not taking a position on this project. We're commenting on the information that we want the city of Santa Maria to evaluate in its EIR so that in the event that this gets to us, we can make a fully informed decision as a responsible agency. That's all we're doing. And well, you know, you can always be misconstrued. I don't think our intent is to do anything other than to solicit the information that we think is appropriate for our future use if it's called for.
And may I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
And then I have a question. If we didn't do this and the EIR were certified by the city, what are our options for getting the kind of information we've identified, especially Commissioner Nelson?
Well, just to comment on the process as it often occurs is normally staff would just go ahead and comment on an EIR, and they don't typically take that to the executive body or the legislative body. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Legislators often know the community much better than anyone, so it's valuable input. But if you had second thoughts about sending the letter, I would hope that would not include a prohibition on your executive officer from commenting anyway.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right. I'm sorry. I did close public comment. So we do have a motion, we have a second, and I think we're ready then to vote on that motion.
Commissioner Freeman?
No.
Commissioner Guyer?
No.
Commissioner Kiriakou?
Aye.
Commissioner Patino?
Commissioner Patino has left.
Commissioner Stark?
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Chair Hartman?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-2.
All right, now we're going back to business item number 3.
Chair Hartman and members of the
Thank
board.
the public for showing up. I appreciate it.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission. Business item number 3 is to consider recommendations regarding the work program for transportation, parking, street sweeping and beautification, lighting, transit, and airport municipal service and sphere review, and approve the proposed outline and schedule.
Mr. Prater, and how long do you think this will take? I know we let that go a bit
Yeah.
long, but
I hope this doesn't take as long, but there was a lot of discussion under the wastewater MSR. So there may be some carryover as to how that process went, as to how we're requesting this process to go. So I'll caveat it with that
all
statement.
right.
But essentially, this is our opportunity to start our next MSR, covering multitude of these services: transportation, parking, street sweeping, street beautification, street lighting, transit, airport services. So with that, this MSR will likely follow the model that we prepared for the water sewer and the police and fire. And that will cover the agencies that are reviewed in this MSR. In particular, we'll look at the comprehensive services that will be reviewed. This largely follows the work plan that was adopted by the commission at its January meeting. We'll go through that outline. We'll provide some public comment. We'll answer any questions. Just a little brief background. We did the fire and police. We did the water, wastewater. Fire and police covered 13 agencies. Water and sewer covered 33 agencies. You can see the list there. We still have, we're on the downhill side, as I would say. We're now looking at transportation. We've got 23 agencies that will be involved. Following the heels of this, next year we'll look at parks, open space, library, facility rentals, services, and then all the catch-all of every other services that we didn't provide. And that will wrap up our service review program. So as we get into the 23 agencies, again, what we're going to look at is the ongoing operations of these 23 agencies, what their financial performances are, what their governance structure looks like, their ability to provide the services that we're looking at and modeling, their importance within the area as a whole. And then we're going to adopt determinations as required by state law for service reviews and spheres of influences. I will note that as we've evolved and repeated agencies, it is an opportunity to go back and update their service reviews in areas that we've already covered. Because there may be changes, and we want an MSR service review that is as accurate and up-to-date as we can be. And as we go through this 5-year cycle, there may be some changes within the last 5 years that we can take advantage of as we continue to roll through the service review and sphere update. So just keep that in mind. Again, the proposed outline, very similar: an executive summary, a chapter 1 that covers the service review, a chapter 2 that covers the sphere determinations. And again, adoption of spheres for those agencies that have been discussed that completes all of their services. So that's most notably those single agency services, all the lighting districts that only do lighting service. Those spheres will be adopted. And any previously covered agencies. We have the Goleta Sanitation District in this one, where we just evaluated their capabilities on sanitation. They also provide street sweeping, so they will be picked up for street sweeping services. That will complete all of the services that they provide. At the end of this cycle of this one, we will adopt a sphere for them. And then lastly, the chapter 3 is the 23 agencies will each have their own profile, as you saw on the water, wastewater. And then we'll do an appendix, how it ties all together, and the sources of data that we use. So next steps is to send out the survey questionnaire, which is attached as part of this packet, to all 23 agencies and their respective staff members, so that they can begin providing responses. We're asking for a roughly 30-day time frame, have all those responses back to LAFCO by April 7th. Again, work iteratively through the process, preparing an administrative draft, hopefully have an administrative draft out by summer, and then begin a public review process as we have started with the water, wastewater, ultimately releasing this in November for an adoption by the end of the year.
You've seen the outline as proposed. You've seen the questionnaire that's been presented to you. Staff's recommendation is that the commission agrees with this approach. Then you adopt this outline, you adopt this tentative schedule, and you give staff direction for that. That concludes our presentation.
That was very succinct. We're back to the commission. Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Chair Hartman. Just a quick question. I think this is great. Very well needed. When we do these evaluations, we're going to see, like, for example, CSA 5 that was in Orchid. Sometimes these are a shotgun, right? So there's all these parcels that are partly in a district and some that aren't. Is there any discussion in this evaluation about some strategies of kind of closing those things up and unifying some of those areas so that services can be delivered in a more efficient manner, or where there's service gaps?
Yeah, as we did with water and wastewater, we were reaching out to the managers of those CSAs, talking about where those gaps are, what are the challenges they see, identify any study areas where we might want to expand the sphere of influence. That's our opportunity to express all of that.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Stark.
I think I have a simple question. It's more of a nature of a suggestion with respect to the questions that are asking. It may be in there. I didn't notice anything related to evacuation routes. My understanding is that most entities, at least those with safety elements, have to update their safety elements and provide for catastrophic evacuation routes. It's somewhere in the general plan. I think it's in the safety element, but I think it would be good to know if each of the agencies had a plan for how they intend to evacuate their jurisdictions in the event of a catastrophe.
Good observation. We'll add that.
Yes, critical. Anything else that comes to mind? Do we have any public comment on this item?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
Okay, back to the commission. May I have a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve the recommended actions by our executive officer.
Commissioner Guyer, will you second?
I'll second it.
All right, any further discussion? Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Freeman.
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriakou.
Aye.
Commissioner Patino. Absent. Commissioner Stark.
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson.
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
I have a procedural question. So actually, on this vote and on the prior vote, I'm curious. So Patino is not has left. Isn't Richardson and the city alternate? No. Okay.
He's a public.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm okay.
He's a city alum.
We still have a quorum, I hope. Okay, on to our information item, item number 1. Madam Clerk?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, information item number 1 is to receive a report on chair's approval of an out-of-agency services for the Goleta Sanitary District to provide sewer services to property located in the unincorporated area of the county at 1330 San Antonio Creek Road, Santa Barbara, California, authorized by commission chair.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, briefly, this is just a highlight of out-of-agency service agreement that was submitted and approved by our chair per our policy for a property that was in need under a public health and safety threat. And so this has been placed on the agenda per our policy that we would notify the commission of the action that was taken and authorized by the chair. So that's simply the note here on this.
So do we have any public comment on this item?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak.
All right, so any questions of Mr. Prater? Let's go to information item number 2.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, information item number 2 is to receive and file a report on pending Santa Barbara LAFCO applications.
All right. we have a brief PowerPoint which outlines our applications that are currently submitted that staff is working on. And we anticipate bringing many of those to hearing in the next couple of months. I would note Lucky Lane still has to complete a property tax agreement. We anticipate that being on the Board of Supervisors' agenda in the near term, and we likely will still make that April hearing. But for some reason, if it doesn't get completed, we'll move that to our May. It's real close to being ready. The Key Site 2, or the portion of Key Site 2 and its track map, actually hit a bit of a snag with its tentative map approval and whether it's still an active tentative map with the county surveyor's office. And so we need to iron that out before LAFCO takes any action of an annexation of that territory. But we essentially are ready in the April hearing. That largely covers CSA 5 and North County lighting for services as a condition of that track map. But obviously, if that track map falls off the table, then it no longer has a condition to be annexed. But those are being queued up for that. Raywater and Sunrise Hill are both applications in for out-of-agency service agreements. As we indicated, these will be coming forward. Raywater is under a public health threat and is being sponsored by State Water Resources Board to leave the Mutual Water Company and go to the city of Santa Maria to resolve that issue. Sunrise Hill is just been previously authorized to do an out-of-agency service agreement by this commission back in 2020. The property has sold. It will now be split under an SB 9 bill, and landowners choose to develop it with 4 homes rather than 2 homes. And so they need to amend that out-of-agency service agreement to allow all 4 homes to be connected to water and sewer into the city of Santa Barbara. And then 1330 San Antonio Creek was the previously mentioned out-of-agency service agreement authorized by the chair. We anticipate that application coming in as it was a condition of approval for that authorization. So those are the applications that are currently presented for the commission to consider. That's in-house right now. So if any questions about any of those, I'll be happy to answer any.
I see no lights up here. Any public comment?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
All right, let's go on to information item number 3.
Information item number 3 is to receive and file a LAFCO white paper entitled Planning for a Sustainable and Predictable Future, clarifying LAFCO authority to determine Government Code Section 56133E exemption eligibility.
Thank you, Chair. This is just that. It's a white paper that was presented by LAFCO and various LAFCO staffs that wanted to make explicit that the authority to authorize out-of-agency service agreements rest with LAFCO and the commission. And many other LAFCOs, there's some debate about that, whether or not entities can self-exempt themselves under that clause. And so the LAFCO is looking for a potential sponsor for a bill to make it very clear in a rewrite of legislation that LAFCOs have that authority to make that determination. And that's essentially what this white paper is about. So if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to answer any.
Again, I see no lights. Any public comment, Madam Clerk?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
All right, final information item number 4.
Information item number 4 is to receive and file a report on the 2023 LAFCO staff workshop.
Great. And Commission, this is to announce the staff workshop will be held in Murphy's, California from April 26th to 28th. And your staff is going to participate in this. And so the registration information and hotel information's all been presented. The rooms apparently went really fast, and they were all gone before we even could take this to the commission. And so the executive officer used his privilege when we were reached out by another LAFCO that said they had some extra rooms at the discounted rate. We snatched those up as they were getting rid of them. So we booked ourselves for that, unfortunately ahead of the opportunity to ask the commission whether or not we could do that, but we seized the opportunity to get the better rates.
I see nodding heads, and this is just informational. So, Madam Clerk, any public comment on this?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
Do we have any commissioner announcements? Commissioner Richardson.
I appreciate the work that the clerk is doing, but it would be helpful if we could have colored pages back between the agenda items in the packet, because I'm finding myself turning back and forth trying to find the agenda item and folding over the tabs and those sorts of things. I noticed Bob's got a row of tabs on his in his packet that must have taken an hour to put in there. So
I have staff.
yeah, I don't have staff.
I can
So
have them do
if we
two.
could do something like inserting some kind of divider in there that's recognizable between those agenda items, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Any other matters of great import? All righty. Executive officer comments.
I did not have a comment, but I neglected to inform the commission that we did order the new 2022 Cortesia-Tertzberg Acts. And so they will be coming, and we will have some available for the commissioners.
All right. Are they redlined with the changes, or we just?
They do. They show the previous version as all
Terrific.
They always do.
All right. With that, we're adjourned to Thursday, April 6, 2023 in Santa Maria.